All right, everyone. Good morning and welcome back to another awesome session of Minnesota Customized Employment. As always, we always like to open up with a friendly quote just to get the day going here. We have one from David Brooks, and it says, almost every successful person begins with two beliefs. The future can be better than the present, and I have the power to make it so. And we really feel like that just sets the tone for what we're talking about with customized employment and how to customize jobs, right? We've done so much work with discovery. You've learned about different approaches, and now we're going to put it all together and how to actually customize jobs. So with that being said, a little bit of engagement real quick here first. What was the best part of everyone's weekend? Just toss that in the chat real quick. You know, for me, it was hot and muggy, but just spending a little time with some family and friends. I got some landscaping done in the moment. Emily graduated. Congratulations. MOA with your daughter. Fantastic. You moved. Awesome. Spending time with family. DIYing some furniture. Great. Hey, Grandpa John's 91st birthday. Fantastic. The zoo. It's just nice. Everything's opening up a little bit more. We're getting back at it. Visiting, working on a training presentation. Brent, your workhorse. So I hope you're taking it, evening out your week here. You got geese to your first house. Congrats, Megan. That's awesome. Grilling. A lot going on with this group here. So that's fantastic, everyone. I'm glad everyone had a lot of good things to be grateful for over the weekend and starting everything off on a positive here. Always makes the week better when you can start off with a solid weekend. So with that being said, a couple quick reminders. I know most of you have already done this, but we always love to have the cameras on just for that engagement. All of you have been so good about doing that. Also, if you can make sure that your names are also changed just to make sure that we're calling you the right names and that we can interact with you all. So real quick here too, I just wanted to talk about our previous session, Minnesota CE session 6. What did we talk about? What did you learn? Let's do a quick recap of that day. In the chat, throw out what you learned or what you remember from session 6. The elevator speech. Yep. Oh, I skipped, David. Okay, thank you for letting me know. We're just talking about the recap for session 6. Throw it in there. Employer presentations. Absolutely. Elevator speech, employer presentation, just business resources, informational interviews. Exactly. We just talked about opening up the possibilities for employment and initiating those conversations with employers, right? So with that being said, it's a great segue because we had a really good homework assignment practicing that elevator speech, the shopping challenge. So I think that's a good segue to doing our group activity to kick things off. Next slide.
Hello, everybody, and it's nice to see everyone again today. I'm not sure if we were going to mention this, but I'm just going to put it out there in case it's on anybody's mind. We will be taking a moment of silence for George Floyd today. I believe we're going to be doing it just before 9:29. It sounds like there might be multiple times throughout the state today, so we're hoping we're getting the time right. So we'll be doing that today. We got a timer set, but if anybody notices, I know Jolene will be watching the time, so we'll be doing that today. So back to Minnesota CE. As you guys know, we love to break into small groups as one of the first things and discuss the homework that you guys did. So first, let's just review what you guys were working on. And that was that elevator speech. We practiced a little bit last week. We had you think about it over the weekend, and we're gonna break into small groups today and talk about that a little bit more. And why is that? It's because it's so important to build confidence when talking to employers about customized employment. And there really are different approaches depending on if you're going to be in informational interviews, if you're going to do an employer presentation. There really is a lot of different angles. So we want you guys to think through that. You guys, if you guys were comfortable and it fit your agency's policies, you guys were going to do an in-person shopping challenge. So we're really interested to hear about what you guys were able to learn in person. And then we had you doing a virtual informational interview. What's the difference between in-person versus virtual? What were the different barriers and issues, and what were the different things you were able to learn? So how did it go in person and how did it go virtual? We just want you guys to talk about your experience. Please nominate one person to come back to the large group and share. We are going to spend 15 minutes in that small group, and then we're going to come back together for a large group for about 10 minutes to share. Jolene, why don't you break us into the small groups? Guys, I have to pop out. Oh, I'm here. Oh, you didn't pop me into one, did you, Jolene? All right, awesome. Well done. I'm going to go deal with this broken toe. I'll be
Goodness,
But you're here.
yes. Happy Tuesday.
It feels like a Monday to me, but yeah, happy Tuesday.
Sounds like
one.
maybe some mortgaging problems or something. Those are nightmares.
No, building a house, it's a nightmare.
Oh
Don't
my
ever
gosh,
do it.
Don't
Don't ever do it.
I don't envy you at all. But it'll be worth it when it's done.
At least you're not living in a tent like Matt and I did when we built our house. That was horrible. I will never do that again. I will get a shipping container, a little something or other, anything other than a tent. And then like every time, every weekend we went up,
No.
something would happen to the tent. One time ants like ate holes in the tent between one weekend and the next. One time our dog just like ran out the side of it. We went through like 4 tents that summer.
Oh boy.
I have tent PTSD from it too.
But you have the
Never getting in
experience,
another
Lindsay.
tent again.
Okay, I believe everybody is back now.
Sorry, everybody. I apparently have the wrong view up because I just thought there was 5 of us sitting here. Now I see all your faces. Wonderful. Well, hopefully you had a fruitful small group. And who would like to share? Where's some hands? Okay, Nicole, why don't you start, please?
So our group really talked about doing a little bit of research before going into, the informational interviews and like the shopping challenge. Cause I will say, like, I did it kind of naturally this past weekend, and it was hard, and I'm an extrovert, but I found it really hard just to kind of strike up a conversation. So I actually ended up finding my husband's supervisor, and I like complimented how well the pop, he works for Dr. Pepper, and how well it's looking, because I know about pop. It's a weird knowledge I have now, but I was able to kind of naturally do it. But what we talked about more was, doing a little bit of research so that way you're not going in blind is
Yep.
very beneficial.
Absolutely. Did anyone in your group do a little research?
Yes.
And if so-
Lindsay did some research with the store she went to in Mankato, and she actually had a really good positive shopping experience and was able to like compliment the manager and then go into talking about things. So I think also just using a little bit of honey, helps with it too.
I don't know if we talked about this yesterday, but sometimes we do talk about like being a customer. So like a lot of times, like I just a couple, when I learned this through Griffin Hammis, I went to a chocolatier, I believe they're called. And of course, bought some chocolates, right? As the first step, and then started talking to them. So it is a compliment. I like that. I think we're going to add that to our training next time. We'll do a little compliment, be a little bit of a customer, find the way for that to naturally go. Perfect. How about the next person who'd like to share? I saw another hand, but it went down.
It was me. I don't know why it went down.
Oh, okay.
So our group talked a little bit about our elevator speech, and we all kind of really, the through line was keeping it conversational. Maybe we start with, hey, what do you do? And then listen first. And then, if someone's telling you what they do, they're almost going to automatically give you the opportunity to tell them what to do. It's like a social thing. So that we find works, keeping it conversational, and just trying to, build some rapport right away. The in-person shopping challenge, a couple of us did that, and we did find and we talked about, sometimes it's like you go to these businesses or areas and you it's kind of, sometimes you get the bad luck. You're not actually talking to the right person. Maybe you're talking to, the girl who works there on the weekend for, Saturday, that's it. And, maybe we can't get information on these products or what's going on. So maybe it's, you go back another time. And then the virtual interview, none of us actually got one of those done over the weekend, but one of the gentlemen in my group, his name escapes me right now, but he does a lot of these, and he did give some good advice because he does a lot of calling businesses, etc. And one of the things I took away from that was, he's like, try to call, and this kind of goes back to the research, try to call when the business is slow, not too early in the morning, because all the managers are answering emails, and not at the end of the day because they want to go home. So try to get on that lull point of the day, maybe like 2:30, 3:30. And it's a numbers game. If you can just talk to the right person at the right time, you might be able to set something up. And then I did an in-person interview with a lady I work with every 6 months. I do a job with her, and she works for a company called Comfort Keepers, and she does her business that she works for does essentially companion care for elderly, not CNA stuff, maybe the stuff that CNAs don't do, but more like socializing. And we didn't have a lot of time to talk because she had to go and I had to go, but I was surprised, and I took away with how interested she was in what I do. And she offered up hey, I want to talk to some of my coworkers about this, email me. And then maybe someone will come of this, maybe it won't. But I was very pleasantly surprised. I found a person who's interested in it, and maybe she's going to go and do some of my work for me. Maybe she'll
Right.
email me next week and be like, hey, Nick, you should talk to this person. So like something like that could happen.
Yep.
And then, yeah, that's kind of what my group talked about.
Awesome. And I just wanted to piggyback on that idea of finding the right time and the right person. That is a key thing to accomplish. And it's okay to ask. So say you get in and you start to realize, you know, you might ask some questions like, well, how long have you worked here? Or how many hours a week do you work? Oh, I started last week and I work 2 hours Saturday morning, right? You already know that's not the right person to talk to. But you could ask, you know, who do you think the best person would be to talk to learn more about your industry, not to talk about job openings, right? But to learn more about your industry. And when is the best time to contact them and how? So should I call? Should I email? Should I swing by? If you tried to catch me at 2:30, you would never find me because I'm out the door by noon if humanly possible. So everybody's a little bit different. But I think you'll universally know you don't go to a restaurant during the lunch rush. Some industries are easy to identify that. Perfect. Anybody else want to share?
I will.
Perfect, go ahead.
Yeah, so just kind of going into the shopping experience thing, I kind of had like a interesting experience over the weekend where I was sitting at a coffee shop doing schoolwork, and you know, after a while I just was like, I just need to talk to somebody, and I had no intention of anything. I just decided to I started talking with the owner, and I was talking with them, and I asked like, oh, where do you actually get your beans? Because most coffee shops, they get their beans from somewhere. And I found out that, first of all, this coffee shop that I really like roasts their own coffee beans. And so I'm like super interested in that. So I just started asking them questions about that. And basically through this entire process, like I was just like having a really fun time talking to them. They ended up giving me like a sample of some coffee beans, like a sample one. They also knew that I really, just because I go there often enough, they knew that I really like macadamia nut milk. So they gave me a sample, or like gave me a container of macadamia nut milk. So that way when I drink their coffee, which by the way is like the best coffee beans I've ever had in my life, just for the record. But anyways, they like gave me that so that way when I go home, I can actually have the full experience and be able to give them all that. And they also offered for me to come and like actually watch them roast coffee beans one day. And like, it was just like, we talked about like pretty much, it ended up being like probably like a 45-minute conversation where we just ended up like talking about all things related to coffee, pretty much relating to where, you know, getting the beans from, you know, like, you know, overseas, and like talked about the actual plantation places, and then also talking about, you know, what he does when he gets them, how they're the different methods that they're washed and things like that. And it actually just like reminded me a lot about like how many different routes there are within a career. You know, like if someone would have said like, oh, I really want to work around coffee, like I would just think instantly barista, right? Or maybe even a roaster, and like realizing the fact that there are so many options available, and like, you know, from working at that plantation, working, you know, washing them, whatever the process is. And it just kind of reminded me a couple things. One, when you just like aren't necessarily going and talking about job opportunities, it opens up a whole lot more opportunities by not using the word job, because I had no intention of any of that, like not at all. And then just even like learning that within us, you know, like one little thing, you could pick one single thing and you could realize how many different jobs are involved in getting to that thing. You know, my little tiny cup of coffee that I'm enjoying, you know, there's probably like hundreds of workers that were involved in getting that cup of coffee to me. So
I can actually see like the flow chart in my head of all the different, you know, people involved in that whole process. So I think that was a perfect description of how a really natural informational interview goes. And I know that when I spoke, at least with my small group, I talked about how if this doesn't flow comfortably for you, really finding a topic that you are passionate about, and really the more unique, the easier it is. And I think that that will help you be really comfortable. It'll help you show how it can naturally go. So then when you're working with individuals and they have their own unique interests, even if you don't share it, you can start to see how it flows, and that research you can do ahead of time to maybe ask good questions or lead it really into learning more about that industry versus just those jobs available. So really excellent examples there, guys. And if nobody else, oh, Erin, were you raising your hand or? No, just waving to the wildlife. You look like you're in a cabin up there. I don't know what's going on. Okay, perfect. Next slide.
Yeah, I'm in Washington. Sorry, I'm on a vineyard.
Beautiful. So today we are going to learn a bunch of new things. We're going to really dive in deeper to some of the things we were talking about last week, but we're going to talk about handling rejection, because even as wonderful as customized employment is, there's still going to be rejection. And we know that's really hard. We know it really zaps a lot of people of their passion. So we want to talk a little bit about how to handle that so you still maintain that high level of engagement. We're going to talk more about different employer approaches and dive in a little bit deeper. I did notice last week that people were talking a little bit about job shadowing and other things. We're going to actually talk about that today. So I know some of you guys were seeing how this was going to lead into it last week. We're going to talk about true job customization and how that looks a little bit different than job carving. We're going to talk about the differences. We're going to talk about how to negotiate that job. We had some questions last week about when things don't really fit perfectly in like a traditional job search, and how in customized employment, how we negotiate it to really work around those issues. We're going to talk about our job development plan and really how that can be completed and what we're looking for with that. And then we're going to also talk about, once you're on that new job, how do you establish supports, natural supports at the workplace? So that's what we're going to be learning about today. Next slide.
Great. Thanks, Lindsay, and great conversation right there. I heard so many key things that just tie it all back to today's conversation and customized employment in general. You guys are all rock stars, and I just love hearing from all of you. And really, we just learn from each other, right? That's part of this experience and this training right here. So as Lindsay said, one of the objectives today is handling rejection, and who better to talk about that than me? I had a lot of experience in high school, and so it just prepared me for my working life here. So with that being said, I mean, like Lindsay said, it's just part of our natural job that we're going to hear about rejection. Okay. But the biggest thing is, I didn't stop after I got rejected the first time. I still fell in love. It is possible. All right. So with that being said, switch to the next slide, please. We do want to talk about rejection because, again, it's a reality of what we do. As Lindsay said, it can be draining on ourselves and our psyche and our motivation and just getting out there. But the biggest thing is there a better approach? How do we avoid that word no? And more importantly, how do we take rejection and turn it into a positive, right? How do we still take that information, that encounter? How do we pick out those tidbits that are still positive, and how do we follow up with that? One of the big things that we talk about is just how to pick yourself back up and keep going with that. Is a lot of it is just saying, hey, you know, as long as I make a solid new connection where it's a real connection, I can relate back to them, contact them, that can be a positive thing. And also just listening. What are their no's? Why are they saying no, right? Asking some follow-up questions to that is very important with that. You're going to have a lot of different no's out there. I guess I'm just going to throw it out there in the chat real quick. I know we're tight on time here, but what are some of the common things that you hear as a no when you go out there and engage with businesses? We aren't hiring. We don't have any openings at this moment.
We don't allow coaches.
Ooh, we don't
Insurance,
allow.
I've heard that.
Okay, great. We don't have time. It's a liability. How much help do they need? Fantastic. Yeah, these are all great questions. And so, do they need to do the entire job? liability and having a job coach on site. Absolutely. So one of the big things is when we hear that, what are some of the solutions we can suggest? Well, what are your liability concerns? Hey, does your organization have a policy or have insurance that covers you? Is that just a negotiating thing where you have to maybe sign a consent form or something else, some of their policies, right? Things of that nature. With that being said, we actually have so those are all great answers, but I think that all ties back into this awesome video that we have for you. You should have received this in the YouTube videos. We'll also share it in the link. It's a TED Talks, and it's just about what you can learn through 100 days of rejection. If you've seen this video, watch it again because you can still learn something. It still really sets the tone for today and relates back to everything you just put in the chat. So we're actually going to take 15 minutes to watch this. It's about 15 minutes and 30 seconds, and that's going to actually bring us to 9:25. So I think that might be a good time to take a break and to prepare for the moment of silence if you're going to choose to participate in that. And then we can reconvene at 9:40, okay? So again, we have a YouTube video. Please watch that. It's 15 and a half minutes. That will bring us to 9:25. Then you're going to take a break. You can do the moment of silence if you choose, and then we'll reconvene back at 9:40, okay? If you can't access the link, please just shoot us a message in the chat, and we'll do our best to get that to you ASAP. Thanks, everyone. All right, everyone. Welcome back. We hope you had a great break, and we hope you enjoyed the video as well. Really, it was a fun video, and hopefully you learned a lot. We already had some great comments. Just get things back in gear here. Throw in the chat. What did you learn about the video? What did you like about it? So what did you learn or like about the short YouTube video that we watched just before the break here on rejection? Any highlights? I know people are just jumping back in, so maybe we'll give everyone just another quick minute here. Aaron, positive attitude about rejection. Absolutely. Rejection can be a good thing. You can grow from it. Shouldn't be scared. Shouldn't be scary anymore. Yep. Or some of the other key takeaways that people took from it. Joe, I would definitely take a class top higher. Me too. I definitely am interested in watching his YouTube videos as well, right? Actually see it unfold. Asking why can it turn a no into a yes. That's awesome, Mark. Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the big highlights there, right? And just not assuming that people are going to say no, I think was the big thing, right? Even he got a few no's, and even after a few no's, didn't take 25 or 30 no's. It only took 2 or 3 no's before he got a yes in a lot of these situations. Shouldn't stop you from achieving your life goals. Absolutely. You know, I think it's kind of some of the things that I took away from it as well as it's okay to, well, I just love that rejection therapy. I also need to check out that website as well. But it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to throw out there. I love how when he was doing the Starbucks greeter, right? To throw out that common question of commonality. Is this weird, right? Yeah, it is weird. Okay, that just disarmed that person, and now you're talking on that same wavelength, right? I love that quote. Don't let rejection define you, but let how you react to that rejection define you. There's always that next step or that follow-up question. What did you learn, right? And more times than not, we found out, at least for this gentleman's experience, that people were open to have that dialogue, right? I love the security guard. Can I borrow $100? Well, why? You know, he at least gave him that opening to continue that dialogue, right? Present your case. Tell me why you need it. And so those are the key takeaways is, hey, keep on persevering. We know that there's going to be rejection ahead. One of the big things is that we, of course, know not to do or try to avoid is that pitfall of, are you hiring? Because that goes to that immediate no. However, get out there, practice your approach, see what works, what doesn't. Learn from your mistakes and fail forward. But also just keep on refining that approach because you're going to also find those successes and say, that worked. Okay, I'm going to jot that down. Okay, that approach worked too. And that's really how you bring it all together. Nick, I want to bring the Walmart experience to Starbucks. Exactly, right? And so again, just get used to it, prepare. And that's why we brought this up is we know that you're going to face some rejections, but a lot of times, again, they heard it from so many of you in that activity. we're just trying to learn about that business and make a connection, right? Of course, we're trying to seal that deal, which is what we're talking about next. What's next? We're trying to seal that deal. Of course, we're trying to get that job, but we also are just trying to learn about that business. And when we do, we get employers that are much more open to have that conversation, which leads down that road to talking more about different tasks, ideal conditions, and the negotiating pieces, which we're going to talk about sooner than later here. So with that being said, we do have a poll question for you as well. And if it doesn't pop up for you, I'm just going to throw it out here. What might I ask an employer for at this point to proceed with the job development? The choices are a meeting to learn more about their business, information about what they do and their business, if they have any job openings, or both A and B. We'll give you a quick second to submit that right there. So I think, again, the big takeaway as we're filling out that poll is when we hear, are you hiring? We hear that no, right? And as we learned that no isn't the end step, but I think there's a much better way to facilitate that conversations with the employer, right? So that's what we're all about, is refining our approach. We definitely want to have that mindset. Okay, we had 4% say to a meeting to learn more about their business, which is absolutely correct, but we're going for that answer D, which was both answers A and B, meeting to learn about the business and an information about what they do and their business, right? Remember, we want them to be talking throughout this process. So, all right, next slide.
So now we are going to spend a little bit of time talking more about employer approaches. Last week, we talked about the informational interview versus the employer presentation. Now we're going to talk about what you can offer after those two steps. Next slide. So I think one tool that probably all of us who've been in this industry long enough have utilized is the job tour, right? Can I see a show of hands as to how many out there have done a job tour before? So you might go about it a little bit differently with customized employment because you're going to really be looking for a lot of different things. The job tour can really allow you to get behind the scenes and start to see if those ideal conditions are present, right? All of us should have the three legs of the stool in our mind at all times when doing customized employment, and that continues into the job development section. We can't forget all those great things we learned during the discovery. It is imperative that we take those into the job development. And me personally, the job tour is the number one way that I can start to identify if those ideal conditions are present, to see what type of tasks are being done. I think Emily earlier today talked about that coffee shop. And once you really get behind the scenes, learning all those different things that go into an industry, the more that we do job development, the more we get to learn about new industries. And what we assumed, we're going to learn a lot that we never imagined if we can get behind the scenes. So that job tour is really, really important. They're not mandatory though. It's just a tool that you have in the tool bag. I highly recommend that you bring the job seeker with you on job tours, but just like when we were talking about informational interviews and employer presentations in Minnesota CE, we really do empower you to know your job seeker and know what's going to set them up for success the best. So I definitely have worked with people with ideal conditions that are very environmental, and I might have to do 2 job tours. I might have to go first to ensure that there's nothing in the environment that's going to cause a major property destruction episode or a major physical aggression. Of course, we don't want to set up our job seeker to experience that. But most of the time, you're just going to be bringing your job seeker with. And it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to let their personality show and see if they connect with this business. I can't tell you how many times the job seeker is the one who really sells themselves, who really is the one that's able to discover if they fit here. So it is really important to bring that job seeker if at all possible. I want you guys to take a look at the Truman Plan, the Truman Job Development Plan. You guys had this in the email from last week, since we talked about it a little bit last week, and there's two different ones. This one is where, I don't know if they're labeled differently, but this is the one at Target for loss prevention. And what I want to point out is on page 2, second paragraph from the bottom, this is during a job tour at Target. And they're walking around chit-chatting about what the loss prevention unit at Target does and how they work. And Truman just naturally brings up an article he had read recently about people putting those hidden cameras in changing rooms, right? I bet a couple of us have that phobia out there. If it's changing room, if it's Airbnb, if it's a hotel, right? We know this is happening out there. So this is just an example of how a conversation from your job seeker, if you're in an environment that fits their interests, they really might have information that you don't have. And it is an opportunity for them to bring that up. And so with Truman, he knew that a local Walmart had just found hidden cameras in their dressing rooms. And he just naturally brought it up. Hey, did you read that article? What do you guys do here at Target? It's an opening, it's a connection, and it shows that employer that this is an interest and a skill of this person. It really puts it above just a job. And it's like, hey, this person's already cued into our industry. They're cued into the new things that are coming to the forefront, and it can really open a lot of doors. So we incorporated that into Truman to give you an idea as to how that goes. I probably talked recently about my logging theme person, and we did get to go do a themes testing, which is obviously a little bit different, but once you do enough, they kind of look a lot like informational interviews. But if I didn't have that job seeker with me, he knew so much about logging that I didn't know. He asked so many great questions. And there was so many times during that the employer said, wow, you really are into logging. Wow, how do you know about that? And he talked about watching logging videos on YouTube. Can you imagine how that really has that job seeker stand apart from just somebody who's looking for a job? It can really be powerful. So job tours is a great way, not only to get behind the scenes, but also to let your job seekers' interests and personality come out. Next slide. So another option is the job tryout. So let's see a show of hands. Has anybody used a job tryout before? And I'm going to define it a little bit. A job tryout is when a job seeker is able to really do hands-on the task of a job. So it's not doing a whole job description because we don't care about job descriptions, right? But it is an opportunity for them to get into that employer and actually do hands-on work there. We always pay through MSOC, so you need to know what your agency's rules and regulations are around that. But it's a great opportunity, and it benefits both the job seeker and the business. So if you're working and getting funded through VRS or the waiver, it can be paid different ways. So you need to make sure that you know if it's been approved and if it can be utilized. You do not want to offer a job tryout to only find out you don't have the funding for it. So make sure that you know that you have everything lined up for that. Like we talked about, you know, we pay the person. I know that through MSOCs, but just talk to your agency and find out the rules and regulations around it. And then it is so imperative that before you ever start a job tryout, you have a defined time limit as to how long it's going to go on for. And that really depends on the person and the job. So some individuals, you really just want to be able to give them a day or two to really see if they like the environment. It's really about the job seeker, not as much the business. You might have something a little bit shorter. But a lot of the times I offer it out for 2 weeks. That's assuming they're going 4 or 5 days a week. And it just gives a really good opportunity for them to learn how that business wants that task completed and gives them a little bit of time to master it. Because of course, at the end of a job tryout, we want the job, right? We don't want to put all that effort in and it doesn't work. Although sometimes the ideal conditions aren't there or it's just not a good fit, and that's okay. But you have to head into a job tryout with the potential that there will be a job placement at the end of it. That's a really imperative factor for a job tryout. So let's think about the pros and cons for a job tryout for different people. So in the chat, can you think of anything that's a pro for the job seeker? What are they going to achieve during that job tryout? You can put that in the chat there. I know that a lot of times we think about the job tryout from the employer's perspective, but for me, it's almost even more important for the jobs. It is so easy to think something is going to be some way until you go and really try it out. That's why the themes testing is so important. And that's why for some people, the job tryout is going to be important. It's definitely not needed for everybody. So Margie, are we getting any interesting feedback in the chat there? Anything you want to call out?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of information, just for the job seeker to have information about that knowledge about the hands-on trials. See if they like the job, checking that environment. Remember, for those ideal conditions and understanding what it's all about.
Absolutely. How many out there feel like the personality of that boss or supervisor is going to be a huge, like a linchpin for the success of the job seeker? Anyone have ever worked with somebody who that's the case? I've worked with a lot of people. That personality has to mesh. How are you going to figure that out just with a job tour? You really can't. But 2 weeks at a job, you're going to know how that supervisor, manager, owner, you're going to know how they respond to stress. You're going to know how they motivate and correct their employees. It can be a ton of information. And that a lot of times is my number one. And even if that supervisor, employer, maybe doesn't have the perfect approach, do they listen to me and my feedback and the tips I'm giving them? And do they alter that approach for my job seeker? That tells me a lot because people can learn a different approach and it can really be successful. Work culture is something we haven't talked about a huge amount yet, but it can be a huge determining factor for if somebody is successful or not. Has anybody worked with somebody who likes to swear? Right? Yeah. Might even be you yourself. I don't know. The culture is changing out there, right? That's hard to tell. And that's very specific from business to business. Some industries, it's going to be obvious, right? Maybe daycare and swearing are generally never going to go together, right? But other businesses, it's all about the work culture. So really getting in there and seeing what that is all about is really important. So let's do the same from the business perspective. In the chat, can you put what you think the business achieves from a job tryout? What are the benefits from the business side? One of the great things about customized employment is we have to keep switching our hat. We have to be thinking about the job seeker, but we also have to be thinking about the business. And that's really what is different about customized employment. If you can really get into the mind of the business owners, you're going to have a lot easier time pitching those customized jobs that are going to be a good fit. Are we getting anything in the chat there, Margie, about the business perspective?
Yeah, we got a few things. Learning what the person can do, seeing how they can benefit. So the business seeing their benefits and experiencing those. Yeah, how it's going to be helpful to them, the good fit, how they get the work done. Sometimes that's hard. We try to convey that through the visual resume, but you can actually see the person in the job doing the task.
I think another great thing for the business perspective is a lot of the people that we work with, They may have some processing delays. They might have some anxiety that really creates some barriers to learning a new task. And when the employer isn't paying the wages, they're a lot more understanding and willing to give them a couple of days to really come up to timing or quality compared to when they are paying. They're really under a microscope, and it can feel like there's a lot more pressure. So one of the big important things is to make sure your job seeker knows what the job tryout is. Make sure the business knows what the job tryout is, right? No job is guaranteed at the end, but there is potential, right? Make sure your job seeker knows you're going to have an opportunity to try this out, and we're going to be interested in your feedback at the end of this, if this is a job you want or don't want. And then also making sure the business knows this is for this amount of time frame. And at the end of this, we're going to come together and have a meeting and really learn about what was learned through this process. So even if it doesn't end up being a job fit for either the employer's perspective or the job seeker's perspective, there's still a lot to learn. I think one of the biggest things that I want you to make sure of is that that job seeker knows. Sometimes it can be disappointing at the end of a job tryout to not then have that position. So you really have to manage expectations throughout the whole process. You may have liability questions when pitching a job tryout. So please make sure you know your agency's insurance and what type of tools you might have to explain that to the employer. So if you're an MSOC staff, we have liability insurance. We have a copy of that you can give the employer, and you can really address those concerns. But you need to know what your agency has so that you know that you're speaking specifically for what your agency has. Next slide. So once again, after you've completed a job tryout, you really want to reflect on that. Last Thursday, we talked a little bit during a break about what it's like when a job doesn't really fit, right? Somebody I was talking to had somebody working in a hotel, and the employer was really focused on speed, but they changed their tasks every day. There was no consistency. So probably some of the things that could have allowed that employee to gain speed over time weren't in place at that hotel. A job tryout is an excellent time to pitch some of your ideas, right? So the employer might say, well, John Doe, he had great quality, but not the speed. You might be able to say, well, one thing I noticed is that there isn't a set routine of tasks here. In my experience, you might tell a specific story about your job seeker. Once they have a set routine, they really increase their speed quite quickly. Could we set up a set routine so he is more easily able to meet your expectations around speed? That's an example of things that you can do to really launch between a job tryout and the actual job. We're going to be talking way more later about job negotiation, but this will be an excellent time to do that. Natural supports, right? We're going to be talking a lot about natural supports. They are just key in any employment situation. Sometimes it's the supervisor that's that natural supports, right? But sometimes it's the person at the front door. Sometimes it's the person at the adjoining workspace. It really has a lot to do with who has the knowledge and who has the personality. So it's not always that supervisor, but you're going to want to be really looking out for that and thinking about ways you're going to be able to have that person be independent. Another thing that you're going to want to learn during a job tryout is how is your job seeker adapting to the environment? During the discovery period, we got to see them a lot in those environments they were already comfortable with, but we only got to see a couple times when they were in a new environment. Here's an opportunity for you to learn even more about how they adapt to that new environment. And then, of course, guys, the three legs of the stool. If you do a job tryout and anything is missing of those 3 legs of the stool, you really need to think about that. So I think a couple weeks ago, I talked about a gentleman who just got a job. And although cleaning was not it was not his preferred task, it wasn't an ideal condition that he couldn't do any cleaning. He could do some cleaning, but it was an ideal condition that his whole job wasn't cleaning, because then he wouldn't have the motivation to go to work. But he was highly motivated by other factors. And in this specific job, he gets to put together trailers and wagons and different things that they're selling at the store. So that's a good fit, right? That's a stable stool for that gentleman. You have to make sure they're all there. We all have the experience of trying to make a job work that doesn't really fit right? Anybody have that experience trying to make it work, even though that doesn't really fit, even though you're shoving that puzzle piece together? It's a lot of work and it often doesn't work out. So now is the time to ensure that those are all lined up. Are we getting anything in the chat there that we need to mention, Margie?
Just got a question about how to explain a job tryout to an employer. And so I said that VRS has a brochure we do that in. And so I'll put that in the email to everyone.
I generally just say, hey, my guy has these skills and these interests that fit really well with your industry. We have an option where we can pay for the individual to come and do tasks at your place of business. Would you be interested in that? Generally, you've already had conversations. You've already done an informational interview. Maybe you've already done a job trial. So you can more concretely say what you want them to come and do. It is important to outline the tasks that you're pitching for them to come and do, so you don't show up on the first day and they're cleaning and not putting things together. So you do have to negotiate that. Josh, you want to piggyback on that at all? How do you pitch a job tryout?
Well, I think it's very important that I never lead out with a job tryout, right? This is an extra incentive, so to speak, to help seal the deal. Hopefully with our approaches and our visual resumes and making that connection and targeting specific businesses, we're already trying to put that job seeker in a position where they're fitting that work culture. They have that interest. They kind of speak that language of the business, whatever that community is. And so I think the big thing is for me is just always being educating yourself on the job tryout, asking more questions, working with your local, with your own agency to find out what their procedure is, but also with the VRS counselor, how to have a conversation, pick up the phone, have a conversation, make sure that the sequence of events that need to happen, so you can relay that accurately to the employer if the job tryout is something that is necessary or you want to pursue and they want to pursue as well. So.
Thank you, Josh. Absolutely. So at the end of this job tryout, you're going to have a meeting just to discuss how it went for the employer, how it went for the job seeker. But you want to prep for this, right? You should have been paying attention the whole time. I have never had a summary meeting where I didn't have an idea of how this has gone. I'm going to be talking to the employer during it. I'm going to be talking to the job seeker about it. Each day when we drive home at the end of it, how'd that go? What did you think? What did you like? What didn't you like, right? But make sure that you know what the job seeker is going to talk about during that summary meeting. And you might need to play a role in that, right? You're going to need to know if they want to address it, if they want you to address it. So have a conversation, have a game plan. I will also let you know, I've worked with one individual who could not be in the summary meeting because of ideal conditions around rejection, corrective feedback. And so that's my only time. I think this is something where we really, really expect for the job seeker to be present during this and to be able to participate during it. And you really, if there's for some reason that they can't, you really have to have that outlined. And then that should also go on the sensitive information page. So everybody is aware as to why that person didn't participate. But in my experience, that's extremely rare. Even if it's not a good fit, there's still a lot of things that you can take away from that job tryout. So let's just imagine it was an environmental aspect that didn't work, right? It was a loud and busy work area. And one of your individual's ideal conditions is to have a quieter work area. Or maybe you just learned it during the situation and now you have a new ideal condition. You could ask that employer, wow, John Doe really enjoyed the tasks here. It really encompasses his interests. But do you know of anyone in your industry that has similar tasks, but maybe a quieter work environment? And they might be able to say, oh yeah, Joe down the block does something really, really similar, but he only does custom work. So it's a smaller shop and it's much quieter, right? So don't be afraid to ask about their network and their knowledge of their industry. You can also ask, how could this job seeker learn more skills about your industry? If that employer says, I think he just needs to learn a little bit more. So an example of that is when I was with the logging person, he wants to drive a skidder, not a skidster, skidder, I learned. And he had the opportunity to drive it and the logger observed him. And the logger said, he just needs to get more comfortable behind the wheel. And so I asked, well, how do you do that? Is it like an airplane where there's like a simulator that you can ride? Oh, apparently no. Somebody should create that though. It would be a really good thing. He said, no, but I would offer him to come this summer and drive the skidder on my farm. I think with just some more hours behind the wheel, he would really get a lot more comfortable about that. Right? Awesome. He didn't get a job, but he got an opportunity to build those skills. That can be a huge deal on a piece of equipment as expensive as a skidder. I don't know how much they cost, but they're pretty expensive. So that's a really good idea. Be prepared going into a job tryout summary to have a job offer. Very often, if you've done your work and you have a good connection, it's going to lead to a job. So you need to be prepared, right? You need to make sure that you know the hours the person can work, exactly what you're going to negotiate, which we're going to be talking about a little bit more later today, but you need to be prepared. And sometimes you need to ask. If you've ever done selling in the past, you might be aware that you sometimes actually have to close the deal. So you might say, well, what do you think? Are you ready to offer him a job? What do you think? Do you envision him being part of your team? You might have to say some words to actually get that employer to go the next step and close that deal. So be prepared for that. Be prepared for exactly what you're going to ask. So you maybe did, let's say, 5 tasks during the job tryout, and 4 of them were a success. You're going to negotiate the 4 tasks that individual is going to be performing. Not all 5, right? And you're going to need to know what the right fit is, and you're going to need to know how to negotiate that. And we'll be talking more about that later today. Next slide.
We actually had a great question here in the chat as well. Who has the responsibility for ensuring that the client can get to and from the job location? So that's something that we've already discovered and discussed with the team during the discovery phase portion of customized employment, right? We've already discovered, can they take public transportation? Do they take Lyft? Do family members help and assist with that? What are those options for work? Because again, with neighborhood mapping and how we target businesses, that's something that we should have discussed so we can figure out ways, approach businesses that we know that they would have an opportunity to actually get to and from. So that's something that's obviously a negotiating piece when it comes to the actual job offer and where that actually is and the times frames. But we should have already done that portion to establish what are those options ahead of time. So great question, though. So really the job, just jumping right into it, the job customization portion, right? So how do we actually customize the jobs? How do we actually get to talk to the employers? We've already talked about their approaches to get to that front door, but now that we're talking to them, how do we customize an actual job? So with that, can you switch to the next slide, please? So the number one thing that I always want to say is it really must benefit the business. You know, thus far with phase 1, it's all person-centered, right? This is what we're talking about. That's, of course, human service talk, but during the second phase, it's always a person-centered approach, but we're really kind of putting the business considerations in front of the persons at this point of time. That's what we want to hear about. That's what we want to have a conversation about. So like anything, and I shared this quote before, but I think it's so impactful and ties it back into here. But it was a quote from an HR specialist I heard that changed the way I looked at how do I develop jobs and customize jobs, which was every business wants to be compassionate and help other people and give people opportunity. With that being said, as a business, every person that we bring on needs to contribute to our bottom line. So how are the people that you're working with, your job seeker, is going to contribute to our bottom line, right? And so that's how we come up with meaningful long-term positions or jobs that are going to last, jobs when somebody's actually contributing to the team, to that bottom line, they're going to have job security in the future. And just like anyone else, it's when they aren't contributing, when they're at risk of not being around any longer and being let go or having some sort of transition. One of the things I just wanted to say is, one of the biggest things that you want to do is get them to talk. As you approach businesses, of course, and start doing it, if you actually look up, and this is not me saying it, just kind of the general rules, what is the common pitfalls of sales and approaching businesses and making a sale? One of the common things across the board, no matter what the service or industry or product is when you're approaching a business and you're doing the talking and you're talking about the benefits of your business and organization, your product or service, right? The key actually is not to list those things. Here's my brochure. This is how I can help you, right? And go down those bullet points. You need to get them talking. And we like to call that smooth listening. I think we've brought that up in the past. How do we ask those open-ended questions so they're doing the talking and we can facilitate and keep that conversation going? As you know, a lot of this process is getting them to talk so we can take those pieces of information and follow up accordingly, right? Here's a big thing is a good tip for smooth listening is if you're talking, you're not listening, right? So as part of the sales, it's so often that you see, well, the salesperson is this outgoing, outspoken person that's going to really be doing the talking, that fast, slick talker, right? When in fact, that's not the most effective approach. It really is about guiding the conversation. And really, during the prior presentation, we gave you a couple sample questions to ask. Does anybody remember what those were? Throw that in the chat. Think of that employer presentation that we talked about in session 6. What were some of those key questions that kind of opens up the possibilities with an employer, opens up that discussion? Give you a moment to toss those in there. What do you do here? What are the areas of need? What are some other things? As answers are coming in, one of the things that I personally like to throw out there is, yes, exactly. What would you do with an extra set of hands, right? That's a great question. Here's another one. And actually, I'm going to switch the chat question here. Think about your job, your organization. Take a quick couple seconds to readjust this question, but what is not getting done? And what's your to-do list? What's not getting done in your everyday? Throw something in the chat. Filing, shredding, filing and shredding. More filing. How about case notes? How about follow-up communications? I'm just throwing random things in my world, right? What are some of the other things? Cleaning, things that aren't getting done. How about a supervisor? I know we have a couple of supervisors in the house. What's not getting done on a daily basis? You have the opportunity to increase revenue. How are we going to do that? How are we having those conversations? A lot of times when I ask people what's not getting done, the response is, I can give you a laundry list of things not getting done, right? And those are the key things that we can start matching up some of the benefits of our job seeker to their business. So instead of leading out with those bullet points of benefits, we want to be asking these questions, get them talking about what their needs are. We're not telling them their benefits. They need to tell us what they need. What are their unmet needs, right? So that's why we love these open-ended questions. What's not getting done? If you had an extra pair of hands, what would get done, or what does that look like? Get those employers talking about those possibilities, because we know from our own job experiences, it's not a picture perfect day all the time. And that's even a great question. Is your day every day picture perfect? Heck no. Well, what's not getting done? What's not getting right? You know, a lot of times, and that's a floodgate, of course, because some people like to go down that road of just venting a little bit, but that's okay, because again, they're at least engaging with us and telling us that information. So with that being said, if you could switch again, we just want to make sure that we are the ones who are relating those benefits back to them, to their business, and matching up the benefits to unmet needs. So a couple quick stories around that. So let's talk about efficiencies and how that can work. So I worked with a local salon here in the Twin Cities, and I was doing kind of an informational interview and just learning about the business. And one of the things I said is, again, what's something that's not getting done? And she said, well, the manager was like, honestly, our stylists kind of do everything. We really focus a lot on our guests here. We have like, how should I say, flavored infused water that we do, and coffee and tea. And oftentimes we have kind of a waiting station where people can relax while they're waiting for their appointments. And oftentimes our stylists are supposed to do all this, but they get really busy in between tasks. And she said, one thing that happens is we always want to have clean cupware and things like that, so no one does the dishes to turn those over, things of that nature. And it kept on going down this list of different things that was holding up the stylist from actually serving the clients coming in, getting beautified, right? And so here's again, just an example. By asking that question, they're telling us what's not getting done, and I'm able to match those tasks up to a job seeker I'm working with. It actually evolved into a lot of stocking. So they have these carts to get ready for their clients. Do they have enough towels? Can they do the laundry? Do they all these other different tasks that tied into it? So again, get them talking. Identify those trends or changes in the industry. One of the biggest things that's an advantage here in Minnesota that we don't take enough advantage of is the seasonal changes, right? Even a lot of times it's just demographics, what's available, the product, is this going to be a summer, summertime, back to school, Halloween, and those are holidays. I'm not even talking seasons, but fall, winter, spring. How do those change different industries, right? But those are questions you can ask employers. Hey, summer's coming up. What does that look like for your business? Are things changing? Are things rapidly opening up? We know a ton of businesses that are going to be booming here in spring and summer, right? Get that person talking. What are your goals? And which leads to, what is the busiest time for you, right? That's off when people are busy. That's oftentimes when they need more help. So that's a way that we could often talk about how someone could be a good match to help alleviate some of that. But also maybe their ideal condition job seeker isn't during the rush. Maybe it's pre or post. Maybe it's the calm before the storm. So maybe a question to be asking is, well, before a rush, what are the things you do to prepare for a rush? What are those things that you do after a rush, right? What does a busy day look like for you? And when does that actually happen? All great questions to get them talking so you can follow up and start matching your job seeker, their ideal conditions, tasks, and interests to their unmet business needs. You're talking about how they can complete tasks. You can talk about additional services and tasks that can increase revenue. Absolutely. So one of the quick things I mentioned, a gentleman named Jacob a couple sessions ago, quick CE story, recap, and it'll be relevant because we actually talk about Jacob and the supports we set up for tomorrow. The supports we helped set up for him, and that's what we talked about tomorrow. But when asking an employer, it was called Unlimited Supplies, and they do a lot of bolts and nuts and caps and different things in large quantity. Long story short, I asked, so what's not getting done around here? They said, what's your pipe treatment? They said, honestly, we have so much inventory, we actually don't know how much we have of each product. And that's something that because we have thousands and thousands of each of these hundreds of products, we wouldn't take the time to count it, but we'd really like to have a better idea of how much we have of everything. So we customized the job. So as product was coming in, this person was pre-portioning out nuts and bolts in packages of 100 or 200 or 300. And this actually saved time for those pickers when orders came through. So again, I'm not telling them what those options are. I'm not telling them how this person's fitting in. They're telling me their unmet business needs. I'm matching up my job seeker with all the information we have to those needs, right? So with that being said, switch to the next slide, please. So again, it must relate back to their job seeker though, right? During all of this, again, during discovery, if we've done the themes testing, if we've identified those 3 legs of the stool and we're targeting businesses where we believe those things happen, we should be within the ballpark, right? We should be at eight out of the 10 stars are aligning right now, but we still have to do that follow-up work. Hey, what really activates that person to be engaged at the new job? What gets them comfortable and where they're at their best in a new position, right? In a new environment with new people. What are those considerations? Is that environmental things? Is that social aspects and just being introduced to new coworkers, things of that nature? And again, during all of this, we really need to take in consideration those environmental things, those ideal conditions. So if somebody was going to be working best in, I'm just going to simplify this, front of the house versus back of the house, right? More front of the house oftentimes has to deal with customers, interacting with people, talking, right? So, is this person better in a better environment in back? And what does put it in back mean? Does it need to be in the broom closet or can still be interacting with other people and around other people, right? It's how we set it up and make suggestions. But clearly, through what matching this person up in customized employment, it clearly has to benefit the job seeker as well. We already know, again, what those interests, skills, and ideal conditions are. It's, again, matching those up to the unmet business needs. So don't forget to throw out ideas to them. This is their house, right? And their house, I don't go into somebody's house that I don't know and I start telling them what to do. Well, you should really do this. Let me tell you what's going to benefit Lindsay. It's nice to meet you, by the way, right? Make suggestions. Hey, what would you think about this? What would you think is one of the best ways to open up that dialogue? What would you think about that? Because they can dialogue back and forth, right? It's not a clear-cut thing. It's, hey, what would you think about this idea? Or if Lindsay needed more support, what would you think if Lindsay had a little bit more practice? We set up some more training time. Or, environmentally, she really needs to have all of her resources in one spot. What would you think about? Is that a possibility that we could put everything on one cart? Things of that nature, right? We're setting up and now customizing supports, which we're going to dive into a lot tomorrow. So with that being said, jump to the next slide here. And I am paying attention to this slide, I apologize, to the time here. I know we have a break coming up, but again, it really needs to fit their ideal conditions. Now, this is an interesting one, desired work schedule. I think we want to make a clarification. If somebody's not at their best, they stay up all night, they play video games, or maybe they have kind of a sleep disorder where it's more of an insomniac and they can't get rest. Are we going to try to find them a job in the morning time? Probably not. Let's go with the flow. Let's know what makes sense, right? Now, a desired work schedule doesn't mean, well, I am only going to work between 1:17 and 2:22, right? That's not how the world works, of course. And so when we say desired work schedule, it's just the ballpark. Are we negotiating out 2 to 3 hours if that person's going to be more successful with limited hours at the beginning there? This is the time when we want to throw that there, paint out the picture. Hey, if that person is really looking to get going, work every day, have that structure, relate that to an employer. Hey, Lindsay, really, she's eager to have her first job here, first job opportunity. She is really interested in working every day. However, she really was hoping she could start out with 2 to 3 hours at a time. Make those suggestions, right? Explain to your job seeker that, you're going to try to work best with them to get a work schedule that's desirable, ideal for them, but it's still going to be negotiating back and forth and have that conversation with the job seeker. But again, we just want to make sure it's the right environment. Everybody we want to talk about, it was great that somebody had brought up the transportation options before. We want to have that all solidified, talking about that. And then again, the number one thing is to any business is that the business is actually paying their paycheck. They're actually earned income for minimum wage or higher. Okay. So again, must benefit the job seeker. As you go through all of this though, I guess I should say, in the spirit of the rejection, in the spirit of not having the experience, fail forward, practice this. This is where it comes down to. You have those soft connections in town. If you have those people that that are personal connections, but have, you can go in and talk to that old connections that have jobs that you can talk about their business. Practice this, right? The more you practice, the better you're going to get. So, all right. With that being said, next slide.
I think we're right at
Oh.
the break time here. So my computer says 10:27. Let's take a 10-minute break and come back at 10:37.
Thanks, Jolene.
Minutes, I believe. So if everyone has their fresh cup of coffee and is ready to re-begin, we're going to kind of start thinking about how an informational interview can turn into the job customization. So we talked a little bit about how it works with a job tryout. And now we're going to talk a little bit about how it works with an informational interview. So first off, you need to know what needs you identified from that informational interview, from that job tour that you did. That is the key. If you did not identify any needs, it's going to be very hard to pitch a customized job, right? So first, you really, like Josh said, we really have to be thinking about the business here. If you didn't identify any way this job seeker is going to benefit them, then you do not proceed to pitching a job customization. It's only when you've identified that that job seeker can benefit them. Okay, so how about in the chat, large group interaction here? Let's just think about what you guys did over the weekend. You did the shopping challenge. Maybe a couple of you were able to do the virtual informational interview. What business needs did you guys identify at the businesses you went to or spoke to? If you could put that in the chat, or if you raise your hand, if you have something that maybe isn't so easy to chat, but easier to say, you can just raise your hand. But what were some of those undone tasks, ways to increase revenue, ways to increase customer satisfaction, right? How can you alleviate that supervisor's stress level? All these are really good things that you're going to be able to then pitch as a job customization. And just like Josh said, you're not coming in acting like you know more than that business owner. So you always have to pitch it in a way, such as Josh said, what do you think about? Or about blank, right? You really are there to ensure that what you're pitching is going to benefit that business. So that's that first hurdle that you have to go through. So Margie, what are we seeing in the chat?
See, getting product from local makers, no carts in the entryway. Car repair place, they really need help cleaning badly, but that's in the 4 Fs or the 5 Fs. Informing others about the amazing coffee they roast. I've been there many times, didn't know they roasted their own coffee. Getting back stock out, store employees busy stocking shelves, huge line at the cashier.
Perfect. So let's just riff off of one of those. Let's just play with this, right? You're going to really want to find your own vernacular. And obviously, you have to make sure that what you identified would be a good fit for your job seeker, right? So just because it's going to benefit that business also has to fit with your job seeker. So I love the idea of bringing in products to the store from local makers. It's a really creative, unusual one. I don't think I've seen this come up before. How do you think you could pitch that to the business how do you pitch it to start the conversation to see if that business would be open to it? Anybody want to give it a whirl? Any hands? Am I missing any hands? Well, then I'll just go if nobody's going to volunteer. I might say, people are so focused on buying local. People want to know that products are made environmentally conscious. I'm going to try to riff on maybe something that we've had conversations about during that informational interview. I did a little research after the tour you gave me. I found a lot of local makers of what other products they're selling, right? So maybe you're at a yarn store. Okay, let's just really take it specific. You're at a yarn store. Maybe you say, after I left here the other day, I really noticed that our conversation that you're really importing this wool from all over the world. do you think your customers would be specifically interested in locally dyed or locally grown wool? I don't even know if that's the right term, locally grown wool, locally raised wool. That's how I would pitch it. I would make sure that they're going to have that buy-in. So do you think your customer base would be interested in this? Do you think this would pull new customers to your store? That's the type of ways that I would be phrasing this when I'm talking to the business owner. I might say, you know, when we were talking last week, when I was here learning more about your industry, you said that one of the newest fads was wools dyed with local plants or plants foraged from the woods. I did a little bit of research on that, and I did find some different plants that we have locally that can dye wools. Do you think that that might be something that your business would be interested in exploring more or growing into this new segment? Those are the type of words that I use to see. And I'm watching for their interest, right? While I'm explaining it, are their eyes lighting up? Are they engaging? Are they crossing their arms, right? It's going to tell you a lot about what is interesting them. But once again, you need to make sure it fits with your job seeker.
Lindsay, Joe had his hand up.
Oh, Joe, I'm sorry. Talk, Joe.
Oh, darn. I thought I was missed. Specifically, that's the one I threw out. The product to the local makers, the store was I Like You Too. And they had a bunch of like handmade soaps and like little knickknacks and whatnot. It's kind of a gift shop. And I thought more so for like product safety, like the handmade soaps, they could break in transit if, you know, UPS kind of stuff like that. Also, you know, it's a local guy doing the delivery as well. It would kind of fit into their whole motif. So that was kind of how I would pitch it.
Can you repeat, what was the store called?
I Like You Too.
Yeah.
They're in St. Paul, and then one's moving to Northeast, I think. So they're expanding, which also means multiple stores and, you know.
Wonderful. And they are not referring to the band U2, since you talked about soap.
No. They
I
might.
would have had to do a little research. I'd be going in ready to talk about Edge and Bono. I think I got the right musicians for that band. So exactly, you are tapping into their image, their marketing strategy, right? And how that could even further kind of solidify that image within their neighborhood, right? Absolutely. So another one on here is, let's just talk about the coffee shop, because Emily, I think it was Emily, told us so much about that coffee shop. So she's really talking about advertising, networking, maybe some social media. How might you talk to the store owner about that? Anybody want to give that a whirl? No hands. So something I might say there is something like I was so, oh, go ahead. Just got to wait a little longer. Someone will offer up.
Yeah, sorry, I was actually walking away from the computer when, I got an idea. When it comes to social media stuff, it's a lot of people like to take pictures, and you need those different things on their social media webpage, so the pictures and the uploading of that kind of stuff. You can have somebody coming in with a fresh eye who hasn't seen the store, bringing in a guy who really likes to use cameras and that kind of stuff to help with the uploads. Maybe they like sitting on the computer and playing with social media, so they can help keep those things going. They can be talking and help them put comments out there for people that they've talked to. Maybe if they're acting as a greeter and stuff, then they could hit a computer too and doing some social media type sides of that as well. But I really think it'd be interesting just to keep them in the camera and say, here you go. What do you see? What do you notice?
Right.
Oh, go ahead.
You want to go, Emily?
Yeah, I was gonna say another thing is like just, I mean, having been at that one, like literally where they sell the coffee that they roast is like tucked around the corner, and it's just like not in a great spot. And even thinking about like, you know, when they have all these like bags for that you like refill the coffee or whatever. I was even thinking like it could be something where somebody could actually like work out in like the front of the store, like putting the labels on those coffee bags or something so customers can actually see a little bit of that process. Might be just a way, because I had no idea everything's kind of done behind the scenes and there isn't any type of sign. So that might be a way to kind of show people.
So you might say to that employer, I've been thinking so much about our conversation last week and how much time and energy that you guys really put into sourcing your beans and roasting your beans, whatever. You're saying the same words back to them that they said to you. And I might say something like, do you think it would drive more business to your store if you really got the word out about how much energy goes into this? I mean, we all know how great your coffee is, right? The word of mouth is out about how awesome your coffee is, but we don't know why. Do you think that would drive more customers, or that might increase your customer loyalty, right? So maybe I'm going to drive 5 more blocks for your coffee, even though I passed a Starbucks, because of these different elements. Once you get the buy-in from that employer, then I might pitch some ideas of how to do it. So you talked about some signage. You talked about maybe an employee that can really highlight that on the floor, maybe social media, lots of different ideas. So once you get the buy-in that, yeah, I do think my customers would be really motivated by this, then you can start to brainstorm the actual tasks that you're going to want to customize in that job. And of course, you would probably be pitching the task that your job seeker is qualified to do. You've observed them doing, you know that they're going to do an excellent job doing those tasks, right? So it's how those two fit together. How about the last question? Oh, does that mean they let dog? I'm reading in the chat. She said it's called Coffee Paw Cafe. I'm assuming that means they allow 4-footed friends to join you, but maybe it's like the YouTube shop.
Unfortunately, they had opened it with that idea. And then once they started doing it, well, then all of a sudden the county actually was like, well, if you're going to do this, here's all these other things. So, but they do have like pictures of dogs all over. So now I'm going to print a picture of my dog and then just like hang it in their bathroom without them knowing that that's, yeah, anyways.
Well, lesson from today, do not judge a company by the name they call themselves. Lesson number 1, right, guys? So how about in the chat, you guys tell me from your shopping challenge and from your informational interviews, what did you learn about the environment and the culture of the businesses you guys went to? You can put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand if it's a little bit too difficult to explain in the chat. We cannot overestimate how important this environment and cultural aspect can be for some of our job seekers. Knowing how your job seeker is activated and motivated can really be the key to a lot of our job seekers' success. So just for me, time and time again, my job seeker has a ton of skills. It's how I get them excited about work, how I get them willing to get up every single day and go to work. That a lot of times is the ideal conditions that I'm working with. And it's not as much the tasks, obviously, as long as they're able to do those tasks, that's really the key. So what did you guys learn? Anything? I'm not seeing anything in the chat about the environment and the culture. Now they're coming in. Laid back, casual, close knit. These are all words that I could really see fitting a lot of job seekers, right? Could also be the opposite of what some job seekers are going to want from a work environment. So keep that in mind. And get creative, what can activate somebody can be really, really outside the box. And sometimes we get too focused on the tasks and the money, some of those standard outcomes of working. But, let's say you have somebody who just loves football, but you're not going to try to find a job at the football stadium because they don't want to work on football day. But maybe they get a job at this, local coffee shop right next to the Vikings training facility where all the Vikings come in to get their coffee before they go train, right? Those are the type of things that can really, really activate somebody to go to work every day. Am I going to see a Viking today? Right? That can be a huge motivator for somebody. So don't be afraid to get creative and really think outside of the box. We have a poll, a question, if Jolene can post that. So what are the two different employer approaches we learned? A, informational interview or employee presentation. B, internet job searches and LinkedIn. Or C, networking or word of mouth. You guys would answer that and click submit. Any questions while we wait for the quiz to come back? Do you guys see how this informational interview and these little things that you're going to observe and learn can turn into a job customization? Not seeing many nods. Maybe I got to scroll down through the faces. Not many cameras on today. I can't see people's faces to see if they're nodding or not. Well, very good. We got 96% saying informational or employer presentations. Those are the two different approaches. Of course, that networking and word of mouth, that is going to drive which businesses we go and talk to first, right? So that is a component, but the two different approaches are informational interviews and employer presentations. Next slide. Oh, so job carving. Can I see you raise your hand if you've ever heard the word job carving before, right? You need to be careful with this term. There are some businesses that this is a real turnoff, right? So you might not want to always use this term. But job carving is pretty common and it can be a good outcome. So we kind of call job carving the bronze medal of customized deployment. It is definitely something that you can utilize. It is a way to get that job that's going to be a really good fit for the job seeker and it's going to really benefit that employer, right? And what job carving is really taking tasks that employees are already doing and then kind of carving them off their job description and then having your job seeker complete this. So a lot of the time, job carving is a good outcome for a business because it's more efficient, right? That's generally why it's a good solution. Sometimes it's because although people are assigned the task, there's just never time in the day to complete that task. So I saw some of you guys say, you know, they really needed to clean more at this place. I bet it's somebody's job to clean. They just don't ever. So job carving really is taking already assigned duties from job descriptions and really highlighting that your job seeker would be the one to complete those. I think I talked to you guys about a gentleman I worked with who had a TBI and he was a Hell's Angel. And he was no longer a Hell's Angel after the TBI. But what we did is we went to a motorcycle shop, a custom motorcycle shop. We watched what they did. And those mechanics spent at least, I estimated 30 to 45 minutes a day just getting tools. Just to getting the tools alone and then putting the tools back had a whole other spectrum depending upon how complex it was. And so I just pitched that my guy, he had a lot of knowledge around tools. He could go and get the tools from the tool area, bring them to the mechanic, and then he could also put them away afterwards. So that just made it so that mechanic had more time every day, really spent doing the tasks that nobody else could do because it's so high skilled, so now, you know, such a kind of custom knowledge base those mechanics have. So that's how I pitched it to that employer. Hey, between your 5 mechanics, you just have 5 more billable mechanic hours per day. Boom, right? Bottom line. And then a bonus was the mechanics were so happy. They hated having to go get stuff, go back and put it away. That was not their favorite thing. So the mechanics were also happier. So just keep in mind, this is an option. It's not a gold star option, but it is an option that we know works and we want to make sure you have it as part of your tool base. And then just like I mentioned before, some businesses have a negative perspective and also coworkers can be upset sometimes if some of their job duties are taken especially if that leads to reduced hours. So we just want to make sure that you guys know this is a little bit of a double-edged sword, and you have to really have a good idea that some people can really be a bit offended if you use the word job carving. So just watch it. Next slide. Now, customized versus carving is it's really unidentified tasks that the business needs. So it's tasks that nobody is doing. It's not assigned to anybody. That's the big element. It's not included in anyone else's job duties. Sometimes people are still doing it, but nobody feels it's like it's their job, right? You don't need a job description for customized deployment. We will be talking about why we write a job description after it's been agreed upon. We'll be talking about that on Thursday. But you don't need that. It's brand new. A lot of times it's a brand new task that nobody in the business has been doing before. So like with Truman's job development with Target, part of what he's going to do is he's going to scan the dressing room for hidden cameras. Nobody's scanning the Target dressing room for hidden cameras until Truman's coming and doing that. We can identify the task, but we don't have to write a whole job description around it. So keep in mind with customization, you can really make that fit with your job seeker even better than job carving. You can really come up with ideas that the employer maybe hasn't thought about. And so that employer who maybe has said to everybody else who knocked on their door, I'm not hiring, I don't need anybody. Wow, you just pointed out a whole new task that my business can benefit from. I am willing to talk about that. I am willing to explore that option. Another element when you fully customize a job is it can lead to full independence compared to when we're trying to fit somebody into a job description. So have you guys ever job coached somebody who can do 75% of their job with no assistance, but then there's 25% that they need help on, right? And so then you're there for a whole shift for just 25%. With customization and carving, you can really eliminate those tasks that they need the support for and achieve that full independence that really is the gold standard of all job development, but specifically customized job development. Another great thing that I love about customized employment and a truly customized job is it's easier for me to pitch to the employer. Once I know that it's going to benefit the employer, it is a lot easier conversation to have compared to other job development. It is really fun when you start to work with an employer and you get this new revenue of income or customer base. It can be very, very cool to see 6 months down the line how that really has changed their business. I think that Josh would probably agree. This is where you can get really creative and really learn about different industries and see what works. This is something that you could build on. And the more experience you have, the more you're going to be able to give employers examples of customization that have really worked out. And that really opens up business and employers' ideas. I think that's all on that slide. Next slide, Jolene.
All right. Absolutely. Well, great to set up for the next conversation, which was actually sealing the deal and how do we negotiate some of the things that we've just talked about, right? It's so much conversation. There's so many things going on right now. How do we actually negotiate that out? And I know we just shared a resource. We're going to actually share that in the next slide and go over it in the next few slides here. But we'll get to the next slide. We're going to talk about job negotiation and all the things that we can do to promote that, to have that conversation with the employer, and to really, oh, I just lost the screen here. I apologize. All right, I'm back. So we just wanted to talk about the job negotiation. The number one thing that I want to share with all of you is that it's an idea when you think of it, and it's a plan when you write it down, okay? And at this point in time, again, like I said, that we're making suggestions. We're bringing it up to them. What would you think about this? what would you think about this? Or this is also the time when we can bring up some of those support needs or ideal conditions for our job seeker, right? It's okay to talk about where they're at their best and bring this up. One of the biggest things that we can talk about is the why we have that approach is where we're at our best is a very clever way sometimes about subtly bringing up reasonable accommodations, okay? And we're going to talk about disclosure in a second, but I think that's a really great one is, hey, how do we set this all up for them and customize every aspect, including those ideal conditions? But first and foremost, we're talking about that task list. As you're doing that tour, that informational interview, as you're hearing about their unmet business needs and matching it up to their job seeker, yeah, I think Margie would be interested in that. Yes, I think she could be able to do that. Making sure that you're writing down those tasks, right? Because we're going to circle back to that and put that all into a final document of negotiation. We talk about the job, create the new job responsibilities, same thing, right? As those unmet business needs, again, we're stepping away from job carving and we're really customizing those jobs. And we talked about those open-ended questions that get that employer talking about the unmet business needs. One of the big things that we want to talk about is the job expectation. What constitutes as them doing their job well? One pitfall that we want to be careful of is we don't want to suggest or create artificial expectations for the job seeker that didn't exist before or for other employees. So relating this back to Jacob in terms of the gentleman who was portioning out different nuts and bolts and things, I just asked, what's the expectation for the job? And the employer just said, hey, as long as he's coming here, he's consistently working, he enjoys working. From what I saw in this working interview, he's working just fast enough. And I said, okay, so great. So no quotas or anything. It's like, none of my other employees have any quotas for the day. So I don't think it's realistic that I have a quota for him. Again, from what I saw, he was working at a good pace and seems to be a good fit. So again, make sure those job expectations are clear. But some of those things could be as simple as how it's setting up, right? What is the expectation for before I clock in? How I start the shift? How I end the shift, right? Some of those things can be subtle cues as well. And they can be job expectations and support needs. So I get a lot of individuals who have a lot of anxiety and angst when it comes to new environments and new people, right? So one of those things could be that for them to say hi to their boss every day, just as a job expectation, right? Hey, when you come in, clock in, make sure you check in with the manager, say hi. It doesn't have to be a lengthy conversation and shooting the breeze about the weekend and everything else. It can simply say, hey, Margie, I'm here. I just clocked in. Thank you, right? Things of that nature. Pay and benefits, job negotiation. This is a big one. So as we're advocating for people, and I know we're working with some individuals who are coming from opportunities that pay maybe less than minimum wage or other opportunities that's like a negotiated contract or something to that out. I think I want to relate the pay to everyone else. Has anyone got into a job and answered in the chat and said, hey, my name is so-and-so, and I'm looking to start at minimum wage? Throw it in the chat. Have you ever said that to an employer? Joe says yes, that you're willing to, right? But do you want to? So I think that's the thing is that it's kind of a mixed result. I'm actually glad that we have the mixed result because, yeah, there is something to say, well, it is your first job. I am willing to come in at the lowest, right? But a negotiation tip, it's okay. Sometimes you get what you ask for, and that's the pitfall, right? So what does it hurt to say, hey, I know that Margie, this is her first job, but I really think that she's going to bring value to your company. What does the average person start at, right? You can bring that up. Or you can just say, hey, I think $9 an hour would be a great start. Or you're negotiating something. So let's say they say, hey, this is really entry level position. We do start at minimum wage. Maybe you bring up, well, hey, could they work up to a new pay increase after 90 days? Things of those type of conversations. Those are the suggestions you want to make about pay and for benefits as well. Bring that up and just be careful. Sometimes you get what you ask for, and sometimes you're also very surprised what you get when you ask, okay? So when you're talking about negotiating those times, days, and hours of the week, that's a very important thing to schedule. It has to meet their needs. As you know, a lot of the individuals that we work with, may have certain situations. Maybe it's a medication change or medication that they have to take. Maybe it's a transportation because they take something like Metro Mobility, a shuttle service to and from work or things of that. But this is the time to negotiate that out, right? Again, we should have a relatively a good idea of what's going to be successful when this person is able to work, what transportation should work for them. We don't have exact times because that's still going to have to be relayed back to the team and everybody else that may be part of that. But we're going to be talking about those negotiated times. So here's a great example. Let's do this as a large group. An employer says, great to you. You've approached an employer, you have a job seeker, and they kind of, you get this inclination, they want to move forward, and they say, well, this person should start at, how about they start at 3 o'clock? But you know that they take a bus line that's kind of uncertain and gets there maybe at a different time. What is something that you would negotiate? Throw it in the chat. Make a suggestion. What would you negotiate? Employer wants somebody to start at 3 p.m. We're not control the transportation and then taking the bus line, which is generally speaking gets there around that same time, 3 p.m. What's something that we'd negotiate this time? Yeah, start time later, right? What does that look like? An explanation behind that. That's a reasonable accommodation too, without even saying it. Hey, you know what? Margie's super eager to start this. I think this would be a great fit, but you know, she does take public transportation. And you mentioned this job starting at 3 p.m. I know the bus line gets in at about 3:10. Would you be okay if she maybe started at 3:15 and then we can push that to 5:15 or whatever that time is, right? Still trying to maximize those hours. So that's just one suggestion. Yeah, flexible time. So also maybe that's a hard line. Hey, you know, everybody gets here at 7 a.m. and that's just the work. That's the culture. That's X, Y, and Z. Well, maybe then, hey, the only other bus time that comes here is at 6:30. What could they come here and sit in the employee lounge or whatever it may be for a half hour? A lot of times, yeah, that's no problem. Other people kind of get here early, you know, X, Y, and Z. So there's other things. I've even had an opportunity where that's even something where more tasks and things to customize come up during that before the shift even come up, you know? So those are just some things that you want to be cognizant about when you're negotiating, right? Next slide, please. So Jolene, I don't know if we'd be able to share this one more time, but would you be able to throw up there the disclosure document as well? So this was sent out in the email, but disclosure is something that we've talked about. That's something that you should be talking about with your job seeker prior to the business engagement. We're sharing a resource from Virginia Commonwealth University about disclosure. Again, you should receive an email. We're also going to share it here in the chat in just a moment, but it's a great resource to go over with your job seeker. Ultimately, this is my thoughts on it a lot of times. Well, first, we've most likely heard of the ADA, right? Americans with Disability Act, which by law, an employer is by law required to give a reasonable accommodation to a qualified candidate in order for them to be able to do the job. With that being said, an employer is not obligated to give somebody an accommodation if they do not disclose a disability and the reason why that the accommodation would be needed, right? So one of the biggest things that I always, again, have a conversation prior to meeting with businesses about disclosing, because a lot of the anxiety that we hear is from job seekers is, well, how are you going to be representing me, right? How are you advocating for me? How am I going to be seen by the employer? Of course, all of you know through customized employment discovery and the visual resume, hey, it's the human highlight reel, right? So a lot of times at this point in time, our job seekers are already on board, feeling more confident that they're going to be portrayed in that best light possible. But this is a great way to disclose this. One of the big things I want to hit home, though, is this. It is illegal for an employer to ask, what is this person's disability? However, I take that into the spirit of things, the content, the context and the intention behind that. A lot of times also by giving a diagnosis, it really means nothing to an employer, right? So I've even had an employer say, they're kind of on the fence. I'm like, it's okay, you can ask the question. Oh, what's the disability? Well, this person's impacted by autism. Well, what does that mean, right? So instead of saying that diagnosis, and this is another way around that, say, hey, you know, I can't actually tell you their diagnosis, but I can tell you how they're impacted. Okay. And this is how they would contribute to your business. You can spin that around and frame that in a different way, right? So that's a great way to disclose that information. Again, hey, what does autism mean? That means different thing to different people. But really, a lot of times it's, hey, the job seeker I work with, they want to be social, they want to contribute. They just process and learn that in a different way, process information in a different way, right? So then you have to give them those suggestions on what that looks like for an employer. That's what you negotiate out. So one of those support needs is actually a support book that I often like to do. I like to create a visual aid for all my job seekers, but especially for those who really process information using a visual aid. And we're going to show you an example of that tomorrow. So one of the negotiation things is, hey, Margie really does well with visual aids. I was wondering if I could come in and take some photos of the work environment and some of the employees ahead of time so I can give Margie that information before she comes in for her first day. That way she'll feel more comfortable. Yeah, that sounds good, Josh. That sounds reasonable. What time works for you? Keeping it very casual. So just talking about that, we're talking about some of those support needs, those accommodations, where am I at my best? Again, a lot of times the reasonable accommodation is very normal for any employee across the board, very typical. Hey, be at their best, this person needs all of the equipment in one spot. And because if they don't have all the equipment in one spot, they may not ask someone because they don't feel comfortable at this point in time where that is located, right? They haven't developed a relationship with their coworkers to say, hey, I don't know where this is. Or just saying that I don't know for them causes them anxiety because they want to be seen as someone who's competent, that's a contributor, right? So how do we alleviate with that? Hey, let's get all this stuff. Let's put it on a cart. So with Jacob, the gentleman I'm talking about, the nuts and bolts, we did that for him. And then some of his coworkers kept on coming by and swiping some of his equipment. So we actually just had to put a sign up, and then we kind of talked to the other employees, had the manager say, hey, this is Jacob's cart. Don't know it. No one touch anything. We're setting up for success. Never was an issue moving forward. Okay. So again, different ways to bring up suggestions, accommodation, support needs. One of the bigger thing is also training needs to negotiate. First and foremost, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, natural supports versus job coaching and training. But what is the typical training that they have? We want them to go through their typical training. And if they need extra support, if they need extra time, if they need extra practice, that's when we make those suggestions, right? And we can negotiate that out. In the end, again, I want to just hit this home. It's an idea when you talk about, and it's a plan when you write it down. As you can tell in this short 10 minutes that we've been talking, or I've been talking to you, is we've covered up so much information. We can't expect an employer to remember all that. So let's help them out, right? We're making a proposal now. We've taken all those notes. Now we're going to just say the who, what, where, how, and why, and recap that information. So I always like to follow up and say, hey, absolutely. Hey, Margie, if she's the employer, Margie, do you mind if I follow up with you in the next few days, kind of recapping everything we just talked about? I can kind of highlight all different things. And then you can also respond. This is just a casual conversation. So if you see something that needs to be adjusted, let's have that conversation. Okay. Make it that back and forth, but write it down, recap for them. So they can also, I've heard this a lot. I'm sure Margie and others have heard this too. Sometimes they are the decision maker, but sometimes they're not the only decision maker. So they have to bring it back to other leadership or their team. So it's great to have all that information. I've heard a lot of people, it's been great to see the visual resume and then this kind of proposal with the negotiating things out so I can bring it to the leaders and have that conversation. One of the things that I just want to hit home as well that's been very beneficial is at the end of this follow-up document, give the employer an out. Give them options for what's next and giving them employers an out as well. And because of course we're going for it, right? We are going for gold. We're at that finish line where the employer is interested. Of course, we're not going to sell ourselves short. But at the end of this, when I propose, I usually say, here's 3 of the options. We'd love to come in for a working interview so you can see how Margie could firsthand do the job and with the tasks that we've talked about. Number 2, maybe that I have some reservations and we could set up this job tryout that maybe you've introduced already, right? And option 3, hey, maybe this isn't the best time and best fit, but at least you know what I do and I know what you do, and maybe this could be a fit for someone in the future, right? And so you're leaving that door open. You're giving them an out too. And I've actually had a lot of employers respond back and give me the feedback. man, Josh, I really appreciate you giving me that out because that took a lot of pressure off me that I wasn't like being like sold into this, that I wanted to do this, right? That this did make sense for my business. So they've actually given me that feedback. And so again, you're just trying to, it's kind of like I related back to that video this morning. Is this weird? Right? Giving them that opportunity to be like, hey man, hey sir, ma'am, right? Is this a good fit? Let's have that conversation. So again, writing it down, giving suggestions, making a rough draft, and giving them options are the key to negotiations, okay? Last quick thing is also give yourself an opportunity to follow up, right? So even after recap email, hey, I know you might have to talk to some other people in your organization. Would you mind if I follow up in about a week or so? Yeah, no problem. Give me a call, shoot me an email. Or you can ask what time is a good time and what's the best way, preferred way to do that, okay? Set yourself up for that next step as well in the negotiation process. So any quick questions on the negotiation piece right here? All right. And I wasn't watching I saw some things coming in on the chat. Margie, do we have anything coming in here?
Just some informational stuff about class. And then it did say that research, Emily put in here that research has found employers are more likely to approve an accommodation if it's handled more informally, as opposed to using that actual terminology of accommodation or mentioning the ADA. Just talking about what works.
And I found that too. It's automatically like defense mode and liability and do we need to talk to HR and all this stuff. When in reality, having that conversation, negotiate out like we just talked about. Then you can recap it for everyone. They can bring that to HR if it's needed. And then it's all right there anyways for them to spelling it out and you're not using that word accommodation. So great question. All right, we'll jump to the next slide.
I apologize, guys, if you can hear in the background, I have somebody belting out a song in the hallway. So if you hear some interesting sounds, that's what's going on in my office right now. So now we're going to talk about employment supports. Okay, so you've negotiated the job. How do you get that person to really excel? What are we going to do on those first days, that first week, couple of weeks? How are we going to set this job seeker up for success? Next slide. So we've talked about natural supports. Natural supports are the things within the work environment already that can support the individual to be independent. This can be technology, but most often it's people. So just keep in mind, it can be environmental, but it can also be the humans around them. I am always on the lookout for those coworkers that are going to be natural supports. I am always watching the person who chooses to engage with my job seeker, who my job seeker really responds to. I'm watching for those subtle hints to really identify who that person might be. A lot of times it's the supervisor. That's their role, right? They support their employees. But keep in mind that it can be other people. So of course you want whoever the natural support to be you want that natural support to be assisting the job seeker in success. And it can look all sorts of ways. It can look like it's the actual task they're doing. It can also be cluing them into the workplace culture. Those unwritten rules can be very hard to decipher, and finding people that are going to clue you in is just amazing. So keep your ear to the ground and keep looking and seeking those people out. Modifications and adaptations. Josh just talked a lot about that. And a lot of times we think about maybe a piece of equipment that's needed, but it can be so much more subtle than that. Hopefully during the discovery, you've really identified what your job seeker is naturally inclined to do, what they are interested in, and what really catches their attention. So Jolene, can we put in the chat? We've got a little YouTube clip, guys, and I think this does an excellent job really showing a really creative modification. And they don't really speak directly about it. So I want you guys to be looking for what is the modification they did here and what was the purpose of that modification. So this is just a couple of minutes long, I don't have it written on my slide. Do we know how long this is, Jolene? No?
A
Okay,
little
well,
over-
it's under 5
little over
minutes, I
2.
guarantee.
Little over 2 minutes.
Little over 2 minutes. So let's have you guys take that. My clock says 11:21. Why don't you guys take 3 minutes? We'll be back at 11:25 to discuss the clip.
The clip is 5 minutes. So did we have a time that we want him to go through?
Is it
I'm gonna
5?
say the clip is 5 minutes and 14 seconds here. So why don't you go ahead and watch the whole video and then we'll convene in 6 minutes.
11:28. while you guys are wrapping up, if you want to put in the chat, what did you see was the modification or adaptation? And what was the purpose? And I'll give one more minute for the rest of you finishing up. Okay, I think everybody should be wrapped up now. So yeah, the interviewer also was a highlight of that video. Lots of three legs of the stool we can see from her right there. So yep, you guys got it. It was numbering the transformers, and that was utilizing an interest of his, right? So how do we get him to memorize the different tables? We tap into something he's naturally interested in. His mind is just going to engage and activate as soon as he sees the transformer. It's getting burned right in that brain, right? Perfect. This is exactly the type of things that you guys can utilize when supporting at a new job to really, really help our job seekers really meet their employers' expectations. Perfect. Yep. So yep, it was to learn those numbers. So, you know, that's pretty random. Table number 1, table number 2. I know I would have a very difficult time memorizing that. I have a really hard time remembering people's names or dates or phone numbers. But I can identify a plant very, very well. So for me, I'd probably have different plants to help me memorize it. So just think about your job seeker and think about ways to really engage and activate their brain if they're having a task that's challenging for them to memorize. With that, we're going to take a 10-minute break. So we'll be back at 11:40. Okay, my clock is saying 11:40. Brent's doing his jokes on the chat. Hopefully everybody's back and we can keep plugging along here. So we're talking about supports at that new job and those natural supports and how important they are. Now, part of our role is to give those natural supports the information they need to best support our individual, right? Because it's not just blanket for all different job seekers, it's really specific. So an example of one that I did just this week is I have a gentleman working at Applebee's. And he can start to get frustrated when he's working, but just a 5-minute break outside can really allow him to get that frustration to pass and come back in and finish his shift. But you have to say it in just the right way. So you don't want to say to him, hey, you seem frustrated. You want to go take a 5-minute break. Oh no, that is not going to work well for this gentleman. You want to say something like, hey, it's getting kind of hot in here. Do you want to go outside and take a 5-minute break? Or you've been working really hard this morning. Why don't you go take a 5-minute break and then come back in and finish up the rest of your shift? So we just had to give those natural supports those words to use. And the way we said it is, you know, Sean is going to do really, or, you know, what we've noticed with Sean is once he's starting to get frustrated, a 5-minute break can really help him get out of that mood and come back in and finish his shift. And what we've noticed is if we pitch it in a really positive way, that's when it goes the best. So saying things such as it's hot in here or you've been working hard, those are the type of things that are going to help him transition. So don't be afraid to give those natural supports and those supervisors the exact information they need for the job seeker to be successful. And that's part of what you should have discovered during the discovery. You're also going to need to make sure that there's a lot of communication at the start of that job, right? And that's a big role that we play when we're helping somebody at that new job. So you're going to need to make sure you're communicating with the employer. You're going to need to make sure you're communicating with that job seeker's team, if that's part of the role and part of the supports they need. And then you also need to be really mindful. Are you handing this off to somebody else? Is there going to be long-term job coaching involved? And if you're not providing that, how are you getting that information to the next support team? As an MSOX provider, we transition to a lot of private providers for long-term supports. So it's even outside of our own agency. We have got to make sure that we are communicating the same information to whoever's providing those long-term supports as we are the natural supports. They're going to need to know those right words to say. They're going to need to know those signs that somebody needs some support. You have to give them all of that information. So you need to know how you're going to communicate that across agencies. Ideally, when we change agencies, they actually come and train with us for a day or two on the job site, so we can really communicate and show them that information, but also introduce them to those natural supports. And I love having the conversations such as, hey, this is Margie, she's my go-to here at Applebee's. She knows all the information. Her and Sean get along great. That type of thing. Make sure that you're connecting those dots, because it is really a time that things can fall apart if that information isn't communicated. Another thing you're going to need to be mindful of is COVID, right? There might need to be some different supports at a new job now compared to a couple of years ago. Plus, we also know that this is a constantly moving target with COVID. Policies, procedures are constantly changing. That might be really frustrating to some people. I know some of the people I support are awfully frustrated that the rules are not consistent everywhere that they're going. So you need to know about the supports needed around that. Next slide. So one big thing you need to be mindful of is that you're training to the business standards, right? You need to know those standards. You need to get the feedback on those standards, and you need to make sure that that is the, I just saw in the chat that Truman also has difficulty with those changing rules, right? That will be a big one for Truman. Oh, COVID and Truman, yikes. But you need to make sure that you are training to those business standards. I have seen time and time again where a job coach trains to their own standards. And it can spell disaster. I think Josh is going to be telling a story a little bit later today, or maybe it's tomorrow that we tell that story, but it can be really a nightmare if you're not allowing that business to be the one setting the training expectations, setting the expectations around quality, speed. Josh even talked about those work culture elements, coming in and saying hi to your boss every morning. Is that an expectation or isn't it? You really need to know that. You need to understand how that job seeker learns. This is imperative. The job coach can get in the way, guys. Time and time again, I have seen job coaches that get between the employee and the employer. And once you set that barrier, it's going to be really hard for the new employee to create independence, because that employer is going to be dependent upon you for communication and training. That is not the stage you want to set. Really mindful on that first day, if that employer talks directly to you, you need to bring that back to the new employee. You need to bring them into that conversation. You need to make sure, even if that individual is nonverbal, that employer is learning how to speak directly to them. This is one of the biggest things that I see, is that job seekers coaches take this role of really separating the employer from their employee. And you really need to be mindful about that. If your employee, your job seeker who's now an employee, needs to be given corrective feedback in a specific way, you need to teach the supervisor how to do that. You need to teach the natural supports how to do that. It's really important. Or you need to set up that modification where corrective feedback only comes from the supervisor, right? That's something that Truman would probably want. He doesn't want a lot of different people saying different things to him. He just wants the one supervisor telling him what to do. So that might be something that you need to set up. You need to learn how to give corrective feedback. People can be very sensitive to corrective feedback. But even more importantly, you need to make sure that you're not creating a prompt dependence. Can I see a show of hands? Who here has heard the term prompt dependence? Anybody? So it is something that we create time and time again in our industry, where somebody really could be independent if we gave them the time and distance to learn the task, but instead we're just right there telling them what to do. So an example, during COVID, I got to do a lot of job coaching, guys. I lost all my job coaches, so I was out in the industry job coaching, and I really found myself naturally creating prompt dependence. So I worked with a guy who was doing some cleaning, and he would, take everything off a countertop to disinfect the countertop. And then when he would put everything back, he might put something upside down or backwards. And I would say to him, hey, that's backwards, turn it the right way, right? That's prompt dependence. All I have taught him to do was wait for me to tell him what he needs to fix. What I should have prompted him to do was look at the task you just completed. Does that meet your employer's expectations? So what he learned was that he needed to review his work before he moved on to the next task. He had all the skills to identify he had just put that backwards. What I needed to teach him was to stop, pause, review his work, and then move on to the next task. If you ever want to learn a little bit more about this, you can search for Mark Gold and try another way. Try it another way, try another way on YouTube. It's a very ancient video. There's going to be some terminology that you're not going to like very much, but the concrete message in it really holds true. And what Mark Gold would do is he wouldn't tell them they're putting together a big bike brake. He wouldn't tell them what to do. He would simply say, try another way. And that allowed the individual who was doing the task to truly learn that task instead of to just learn to wait for the job coach to tell them what they did wrong and what they need to fix it. Should one use Socratic questions? I don't know what that means. Who is that?
Hi, this is Rob.
There you go, Rob.
So Socratic questioning really converts it from extrinsic to intrinsic thinking. So as opposed to somebody saying, hey, you did this wrong, you say, does that look correct? And have them think about it themselves and come up with a solution on their own. And sometimes it needs some, it takes guidance in the beginning, but what it really does is convert somebody from constantly looking to other people for direction, but really trying to figure it out themselves. It's that natural problem solving component.
Bingo. Now we have a term for it, a name for it, but that's exactly it. That is exactly what we are talking about. So there's a lot of different elements that goes into training on the job. And we really have to be mindful that we're training towards independence, not towards dependence. And that requires how we are framing things, how we are giving corrective feedback, but also the knowledge that we're sharing with those natural supports and supervisors. Next slide.
All right, well, we're going to ramp things up real quick here to hopefully we're on the home stretch of session 7 here. So we just want to share a couple more examples of this. Couple quick stories in terms of job coaching versus natural supports and training. Actually, kind of a funny one when it comes to, prompt depending and creating a relationship between the job coach and employer opposed instead of the employee and the employer. And so I had an employee once, a colleague, find a customized job at a tie-dye shirt company. It was a small shop that this guy went to different music festivals and things and the tie-dye and everything else. So we ended up customizing a job. And the real quick story is that he called one day to the employment consultant and said, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. So-and-so employee went into the refrigerator and ate my cheese. And I guess this guy was a cheese connoisseur. He had fancy cheeses. He liked having those for snacks, things like that.
And so my colleague and my staff respond by saying, well, that's no problem. Thank you for telling us, but did you tell her not to take your cheese? And he goes, no, I didn't. I should try that, huh? And he was like, yeah, why don't you try that first? And then we'll figure a way to, repay the cheese back that person took. But absolutely, if you wouldn't mind just telling them your expectation about the boundaries, about that, this is other people's property and you can't take it, they'll respond to that. So that's just one quick story. Another one, we're talking about job coaching versus natural support. So I was actually brought into a consult. Gosh, this has to be 6-7 years ago now. And it was down, I should say, I think in Mankato. It was just a consult where I was brought in because we were trying to figure out the supports that were going on for this young person that got a job, essentially doing stocking of shelves at a retail store. Okay. And what I did was I went in and I was observing, and what we kept on hearing from the job coach was, hey, this person, I think can get this, but they're having difficulty really figuring out the system, and the continuous supports needed to go on, and this was happening for months on end. And so one of the big things that we noticed was I went in for an observation, just observed the young woman without the job coach in. And she was doing this job perfectly well. She was doing great. Really, I was kind of questioning why I was there, right? And so as I gathered more information and I was talking to an employer, I said, well, what's going on? I'm observing this young woman doing the job. She's been here for a few months. She hasn't needed any prompts from me. She's matching up all the items on the cart to where it should be. And the employer said, well, that's a good question. I'm not sure what's going exactly on, but when I first hired up and said they used to work at this company and that they could help train her in. And so part of that was, hey, let me show you how to match up the QR codes or whatever they are to the different codes that are on the left-hand side picture to the little price tags, right? Well, unfortunately, this young woman, her strengths weren't reading and writing, but her strength was memorization. She said impeccable memory. And so it was very interesting because the job coach was spending a lot of time on that was again, with the best of intentions, right? But the job coach was trying to teach her a system that wasn't needed. And when we went in there and did the observation, the natural supports was really, well, we actually set her up with a lot of these bulkier items so she could just match it up. The candy, so a Snickers, you put that, if there's empty Snickers box, you take the old one out, you put the new one in, that type of thing. There are other visual cues. And so again, it was just so important. So after this, we recognized that she was doing the job. She very independently. She really didn't need to learn the system moving forward, and she was doing her job up to the expectations of her employer, and that we could really start fading out those job supports. Now knowing that that wasn't a part of her job, that she didn't need to actually know this system, right? So that's why we always want to make sure we're taking into consideration of how that person's learned best, where they're at their best, what those normal training entities are, and really training expectations are, where we can come in and make those suggestions. So again, I think a quick poll question I want to throw out there is, chat question, what, in terms of initial job supports, what do you think a job coach's role is or should be? So what do you think when somebody gets a new job, what do you think a job coach's role or job should be? Throw that in there. Be a support system to the person. Great. Help the job seeker understand how to succeed. Be the support the client becoming independent. Mentor to the employer. Support and direction. Help identify natural support and be a support system. All great answers, right? Task modeling, give the support and help them become the most independent they come. What I like to just say is that our role is really to give them supports when needed, if needed, right? And so again, I think that's such a big thing. Do they need those supports? When do they need them? That we're not creating artificial things that they don't need. Again, it was the best of intentions by this employment consultant, this job coach helping her. But when we got to the brass tacks, she didn't need that support, right? So, and it's actually funny, real quick, is that observing her, I found out she was a very petite person, and the cart to the door to the back of the house was a weighted door that shut. With the cart, it kept on like kind of closing in on her. And then, so a simple accommodation was, hey, do you guys have a door stop she could do so she can open the door, hold the door open and push the cart through so it doesn't just like hit her every single time? And then manager went over to the shelf, pulled off a door stop and said, yep, we got one right here, and gave it to her, you know? So again, just want to share that quick story. Next slide. So we do also want to talk about developing a plan to fade support, right? We don't want to be that third wheel, but we want to be there to support that individual. For me, what I always like to do is A, have that conversation with that individual. B, see what their comfort level is and make suggestions to that. I often like to say, hey, I want to be there for you, especially when you're the first couple of days that you want to get going or that you're starting here. I highly suggest that any employment specialist doing this starts at the beginning of their shift and not come in later, okay? You want to be there at the beginning. How is this being set up? How are they getting acclimated to the job? How are they responding to directions and getting going for the day? All right, that's where we provide a lot of those initial supports, which we'll talk about later. When we talk about fading supports, it's when does it just become like we're the third wheel, right? When we're when we're there and we're observing them, but we know that they really may not need us. What are some ways that we can fade out and start presenting a plan to both developing a plan with the individual and the employer at the same time? So in terms of Jacob, the gentleman I've talked about with the nuts and bolts, right? High anxiety, especially when it comes to new situations. I was there with them every day that first week, getting him acclimated, also helping him with his breaks, going through and seeing how he responds at the end of the shift, and making those detailed adjustments and suggestions as we go on. As he got more comfortable, that second week, I started to say, hey, Jacob, you know, I got you started. I'm going to leave in between the shifts and I'm going to come back at the end. What do you think about that? And of course, communicated that with the employer, made sure he was set up and were feeling comfortable. So I was leaning back, but I was there at the beginning at the end. The next week after that, that third week, I suggested to Jacob and to the employer, well, I wanted to see how you do at the beginning, at the end now. So I'm going to come in the middle of the shift, right? We already set up some of those supports to get you going for the day, to make sure you're on track with the expectations and have your resources. I'm going to come in the middle of your shift, right? Now I'm going to start weaning back. So it actually went from 5 days a week to 4 days a week to 3 days a week to 2 days a week. And after that fifth week, I was coming in once a month in to see how he was doing. In short, now Jacob was an individual that by all assessments done by a lot of different places, he was going to need one-on-one support indefinitely. A job coach comes in every month, once a month, to see how things are going, see if there are new projects coming on, new skills or things that he need a little extra support with. But he doesn't have a job coach there with him anymore because he doesn't need one. He knows his role, he knows his expectation, he understands the task, he has the resources, and he has a great environment set up for him. And that is all because of customized employment. So think about that fading plan. The cue really is when it starts getting awkward and you're just standing there and you're just like, oh, this is kind of boring. They're working, I'm watching them. Okay, let's talk about that plan to fade out. And it can be little at a time. We, of course, want to make sure they're at the comfort zone, have everything that they need, but also communicate with the employer what that looks like. So we're all in communication and just try it out. But we should have a plan to fade out. That's just an example that I use, and it's just based off of what support that individual needs. I just have a quick question. What if they have a history and are unable for you to fade? So that sometimes is where we say, well, this is your job. So these are just some tactics I use, right? Hey, this is your job, right? You know, I try to relate to myself, you know, I totally understand that we have to understand where they're coming from, what their reservations are. So I think that's the best way, Jessica, is, hey, what are your reservations? What are you feeling anxiety about? Oftentimes, again, when we do all this setting up of the job correctly, doing this fading and supports, we're already addressing a lot of these. But just ask that question, Jessica. Hey, what do you still have reservations about? Well, hey, you know, this is your job. You know, they hired you on and gave you an opportunity because they know you can do this job independently. I'm here to provide that support. So it's my job to kind of wean off now, and I'm going to step back a little bit so you can be successful. Okay. Again, I'm just riffing with you right here, but that's just an example. All right. So again, use those natural supports as we talked about, set up a plan for fading, communicate, develop it with your job seeker and discuss it with the employer as well. Okay. All lines of communication are up just in case. It was funny. I was actually doing work in my car, but one time during the fading, The employer goes, "Oh, so you're gonna go out to your car and take a nap now and come back in an hour, huh?" I said, "Well, I got some work to do," but he was shooting the breeze with me and giving me a hard time. So next slide, please. Well, it certainly wouldn't be Minnesota customized employment if we didn't hit you with the three-legged stool here. So we're not going to spend 5 minutes on this, but again, what we try to hit home as always, if you take anything away from this training, a job has to have meet the skills, interest, and ideal conditions of the job seeker, and then the unmet needs of an employer, right? So as we're going through all of this, taking it step by step through theme sessions to the employer approach, to negotiating the job task, to setting up supports. We're going to talk a lot more about supports tomorrow. We're always relating it back. Does this meet the interests, skills, and ideal conditions? What do we have to do to balance out that stool? What suggestions do I have to make? Because we know that to be stable and long-term and to be a real good success, all three of those things have to exist. So just a couple quick questions here from Aaron. Have you had any problems with clients being ready for fading out, but not guardians not? Yeah, that's just a conversation that you have with them. And I think that's what really good, consistent updates happen when you can talk about. So after that first day, I'm not waiting. I'm trying to build momentum with the team and build and open up communication. So I'm not only just making case notes after the first day, but I'm communicating with the team. How'd that go? What did that look like? They're depending on you also to paint that picture of what kind of that supports needs and say, and you can also, Aaron, also meet the reservations by saying, hey, I validate, right? Listen, validate. I totally hear what you're saying. I think those are some valid concerns. But what I've seen so far is that Lindsay's really doing well. I think this is an appropriate time to maybe step back and just let her build that confidence up, right? And show that she can do this on her own and be successful. So it's, again, validating those concerns, addressing them, and really, at that point in time, if you're ready and thinking that you should be fading, instilling that confidence that you have in that job seeker, that they're the ones doing the work, right? Hey, it's not me. So, and also you can also say, and the employer feels comfortable with this as well. There's a plan in place. Great question, Aaron. Let's see. And I know Margie just said an answer to that as well in the chat. Give me 1 second. Cool. So a couple of things is that the supports it all depends. Again, the supports are, of course, circumstantial about the job seeker, what their ideal conditions are, the job as well. Jessica had a question. Would fading out be more along the lines of a long-term goal, or it be something that is on the back burner while they handle more volatile issues? So I'm not sure what volatile issues necessarily would encompass right there. So if you want to elaborate on that, for me, yeah, ultimately it should be a reasonable goal. I mean, I think the biggest thing is, again, what I've learned is if a person truly needs one-on-one support indefinitely, it may not be the best fit for them, okay? And that is not meaning that they may not need some sort of supports or help designing systems for it to be successful or all these other things that go into customized employment. But ultimately, the fading should be more, I should say, within that first 90 days. We should have it, just like anybody else, that a kind of assessment period of probationary in terms of, is this a good fit? How do we make those suggestions? How do you develop those supports? If not, if they're still willing to have that person be an employee, great. But the bigger question should be, does your organization have the capacity to have you there one-on-one Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.? Chances are not. And so that's why we're doing customized employment. What's a better fit? Why we identify those skills, interests, and ideal conditions, because when we do that and we target businesses, that takes away half of those reservations or barriers or things that we're talking about in those situations, okay? That's why we trust the process. So hopefully that answers the question as well.
I'll just piggyback on that, Josh. I know through MSOX, we support a lot of people who need a support there, not for job coaching, but for health and safety. And one of the big keys there is to ensure that you're not doing job coaching if job coaching is not necessary. So there are ways, even if you have to be on site, to fade those supports. People don't need to be perfect employees. People just need to meet their employer's expectations. So sometimes I'm there because somebody has a felony sex offense and it is mandated by the team that there's constantly somebody on site providing supports. Does that mean that I have to sit 1 foot away from the individual? Does that mean that I have to be observing their actual tasks? No, it means that I need to be able to monitor that they're in their work area. And I can do that from maybe 20 feet away, maybe 40 feet away. So you really need to be providing the supports necessary. And that can look a lot of different ways. So just want to piggyback on that. We're going to, you guys might have noticed that Jolene skipped a couple slides there. We're a little bit behind today. So we're going to just be reviewing that job development plan on Thursday, since you guys don't need it between today and tomorrow. We want to leave enough time for questions. So we're just going to return to that on Thursday. So we always like to give you guys a success story, an example of customized employment and the outcomes that you can achieve. This is one of Margie's customized employment success stories. And she worked with a guy with quite a few ideal conditions that maybe were a little bit challenging. He had to work from home. And he really wanted a job because he wanted MAEPD. And MAEPD is one of those rare benefits that you have to have income every month to be able to maintain your qualification for that. So that's really all he wanted to achieve. But Margie really saw a lot of skills in this guy, and she really knew that he could benefit an employer quite a bit. And what she ultimately found for this person was doing QuickBooks for a company. QuickBooks, if you guys don't know what that is it's pretty much the accounting software. It's inventory in, money in, inventory out, a lot of different details. And so she identified that this guy had the skills and he had the interests. But the big important thing for this ideal conditions. And once he really got started with that job, he really was able to take on more than he had anticipated and work quite a few more hours than he originally set out to, because it was such a good fit for his skills and his ideal conditions. So here's a customized job, somebody working from home, something very different. So next slide.
All right, everyone. Well, it's been a great day. We threw a lot of information at you, a lot of good questions and conversation. So we just want to recap today. We talked about handling rejection and watch that great YouTube video, use as a resource, take the moral of the story, right? Which is, hey, just move forward, handle rejection, ask those questions. And the more times that you ask questions and face rejection, the possibility of rejection, you'll be pleasantly surprised with some of the responses, right? And so, as he said, don't let the rejection define you, but how you react to that rejection. Employee approaches, how do we approach them? How do we introduce a job tryout, things of that nature? How do we set up those business tours and informational meetings? We talked about that job customization, right? What does that really mean? How does that differ from that job carving? That job carving, that kind of bronze medal where we're just using a job description and saying, well, they can do 4 of the 10 tasks. Why don't we do that? Job customization is finding those unmet business needs. How do we do that? We're asking those open-ended questions. You know, is your day picture perfect? What would you do with an extra pair of hands? What's not getting done? Those are how we want them to tell us what's not getting done. We don't tell them, right? Then we match up our job seeker to their responses. That's the negotiation portion. Remember, it's an idea when you think about it. It's a plan when you write it down. Make sure that you're giving options for next step and recapping, just like we're doing right now with today's session. Recap your conversation to hit home those points, put it on paper. They can respond to it. Also giving them options, right? This is just a rough draft. This isn't, I'm not chiseling this into stone. This is just a recap of our conversation. If you disagree, want to change something, let us know what works for you as the employer, right? As I mentioned, giving them those options about the job tryout, a working interview, or even if this doesn't work out, at least I know what you do and you know what I do, and maybe we can have a conversation in the future. That's a win as well, okay? Develop job development and plan completion. We're going to talk about that on Thursday, but we just talked about those initial job supports. What does that look like fading out? We're really going to break down the supports and talking about job analysis. How do we identify those supports, set them up, talking about initial and ongoing supports on session 8 next time. So again, a lot of great information, a lot of great resources. Keep that conversation going, okay? Also, just want to let you know before we jump into questions that next Thursday, we are going to stay back as always and answer questions, but especially because that's the last session. Hey, if you want to have conversations, stick around. We want to nerd out with you. We want to be a resource for you. We really want to make sure that we're bridging this information from the classroom into the practical application of your job so we can best serve the people that we support. So with that being said, let's move on to the next slide. We'll just end it with, what questions do you have for us?
And while you guys are thinking about your questions, I did want to piggyback on what Josh was talking about when he was talking about fading supports when the guardians are very hesitant. That does come up quite a bit for me. And one of the things that has really helped me be more effective when working with the guardians or the team is really coming from a place of trauma-informed care for those guardians. A lot of times they're hesitant because of something that happened in the past. And once I come with much more compassion, I'm able to accomplish a lot more. And the big key that I would tell you that's is helpful for me is tiny little steps. So I will often suggest 5 minutes is the starting point when I have guardians who are so scared or so hesitant. How about I just walk away from the work area for 5 minutes at a time? I'll stay on site. I'll even maybe stay within ear range. I'll make sure that the supervisor knows how to get a hold of me. That's pretty hard to say no to. Most people even go to the bathroom by themselves for 5 minutes. So just really small steps is the way to break down that fear. And a lot of times it really is fear. Any other questions?
And the other thing, and this is just real quick here, I'm not going to hold up the show, just talking about that, at least with my previous organization, how I set things up with supports, any individual needs to be negotiated with their team to have at least 5 minutes of alone time, so to speak, in terms of what if you need to use the restroom, right? What if something that has to happen? So right there, you're already negotiating a little bit of wiggle room. Like that's a reasonable expectation that if you need to go, you can step away for 5 minutes, right? And of course, we want to make sure everything is set up correctly, everything is safe for the individual if they have those support needs, et cetera, et cetera. But right there's that little opening. And to tell you the truth too, this is why mom and dads and brothers and sisters and family members aren't allowed at the job. We don't have our family members there. If you take 4 or 5 steps back, then another 4 or 5 steps back, I'm sure things will be okay. So anyways, in the spirit of things, again, we just recognize that we gave you a lot of information. We'll stick around if you have any other questions today. Keep them coming. We really love having those. And also, we're also going to maybe put together a frequently asked questions page in response to post-training. So come with some ideas of that for next session as well. We'd love to hear some of those questions. We'll have an opportunity for those as well so we can follow up. So, all right, everyone. Well, I don't see any questions in the chat. Again, thanks so much for all the engagement, participation, questions. It makes our experience with you guys even that much better as well. Again, you guys have been great. So have a great day and we'll see you on Thursday. I know